Choices by MesserMoon. Chapter 13. Chapter summary. Uh-oh. That's it. That's the whole chapter. Chapter notes. Trigger warning. Violence. It isn't graphic or anything, but I feel like there's just more than usual in this chapter. Classes are still canceled the next day. Some students don't come back from their calls with their parents, and even though the names of the victims haven't been released, everyone knows what that means. Mooney, I swear to God, get back in bed. Sirius stands at the door, arms crossed over his chest as he stares down at a haggard-looking Remus. I'm just going to breakfast. We'll get you breakfast, you loon. You look like shite. Get back in bed. In a turn of events that surprised no one, Remus had actually been rather downplaying how bad he was feeling yesterday and proceeded to spend much of the night and morning being sick. Moons, he's got a good point. James finishes tying his trainers and stands up. There's no class, no assignments due. Give yourself a break for once, yeah? Remus shoots him a sharp look. It's too, Brute? He says it with such conviction that James can't help laughing. Jesus, you're really out for blood today, huh? Remus only grumbles, turning his glare back on Sirius. I'm not moving. Sirius leans back against the door, one leg crossing over the other. Not until you get in that bloody bed. Now go on. It's a face-off for the ages. Two of the most stubborn people James knows going head-to-head. Neither of them wavering. He's not even sure they blink. Okay, but guys, I'm hungry, Peter says, looking longingly at the door. James's stomach grumbles in agreement. This doesn't appear to matter to Sirius or Remus, both of whom maintain their positions like they're the royal bleeding guard. Peter starts inching toward the door. Maybe I could just sneak by? Not happening, Pettigrew. Sirius doesn't take his eyes off Remus. No one gets to leave until Mooney gets back in bed. Trying to turn the room against me? Sirius grins, flashing his teeth. They're already against you, my friend. Lie down and put us out of our misery, Moons, James calls out, which earns him a very rude hand gesture from Remus. My goodness, he clutches his chest dramatically. Hardly appropriate behavior for a prefect. Remus crosses his arms over his chest, seemingly doubling down on his position. I don't know how many times I have to tell you I'm not an invalid. We know, Sirius says, but you've got a fever and you can't go 5 minutes without being sick. Ergo, bed. He does make a compelling argument. Shut up, James, Remus snaps. James rolls his eyes, holding his hands up in surrender, leading to several moments of tense silence. Mooney, Sirius says eventually, ducking his head in a move that James has seen him pull many times, just never with one of them. He stares up through his lashes, all bashful and pouty. Girls fall all over themselves for that look. For me, Sirius goes on, please. Personally, James thinks this is the weakest of his arguments, but apparently Remus disagrees. He exhales, hands scrubbing at his face before he eventually allows himself to look at Sirius again. Fine, I'll stay. Sirius beams, practically bouncing around him to pull back the covers on his bed. Remus arches his brow. Eager much? To get you in bed? Always. Sirius gives him a wink that has Remus blushing something fierce, and James turns to Peter to see if he's noticed any of this, but Peter's already halfway out the door. Geez, Pete, in a rush? He half laughs, following after him. You know how I am about breakfast. And to be fair, James does know. By the time he gets to the door, Peter is already at the bottom of the stairs. Wait for Padfoot, would you? Honestly, the Great Hall will still be there in 5 minutes. James turns back to the room to see where Sirius is, only to find him perched on Remus's bed. The two of them are whispering, and then James sees Sirius run his knuckles softly along the side of Remus's face. Where's Padfoot? Peter demands as James jogs down the stairs into the common room. He said he'll meet us there. Come on, let's go before your stomach starts eating itself, yeah? He smiles at Peter, mussing his hair as he swings through the portrait and into the corridor beyond. James feels something warm in his chest as he thinks about the way Remus and Sirius were looking at one another. He's never seen Sirius so soft. Maybe he finally worked it out, the tosser. Why are you smiling? Peter asks, looking a little unnerved. James shakes his head. Just thinking about how much bacon I'm going to shove in my face when we get down there. Peter makes a longing noise. Me too. James's high spirits decrease slightly as they walk into the Great Hall. The weight of everything that happened yesterday is unavoidable. It's in the faces of the students around them and in the empty spaces along the tables. They pass by Marlene, Mary, and Lily. Peter waves while James refuses to make eye contact. He hasn't quite figured out how he wants to handle that situation yet. Are you two back to hating each other again, then? Peter asks as they sit down at the opposite end of the table. James frowns. We don't hate each other. We've never hated each other. Peter shoots him a skeptical look as he loads his extraordinary amount of scrambled eggs onto his plate. We haven't, James says indignantly, suddenly feeling defensive. I mean, maybe you never hated her, but... Peter shrugs, moving on to the sausage. James crosses his arms over his chest, slouching slightly in his chair. She didn't hate me, she just didn't like me very much. Which, he has to admit, sounds weak even to his own ears. Peter takes a bite out of his toast. Whatever you say, mate. James keeps pouting for another few minutes before his stomach makes a noise that reminds him that Peter isn't the only one who's hungry. He's halfway through his first serving before he speaks again. Hey, I forgot to ask yesterday. With everything that happened, James swallows the mouthful he'd been chewing. But how'd it go with your mom? Peter moans. She wanted me to come home. Took me ages to convince her I didn't need to. What? Why would she want you home? You know how she is. Peter waves around his third piece of toast. She thinks I'm in danger. She has a bad feeling. Being far away from home isn't safe. Peter clears his throat, adjusting his posture. You know, Peter, he says in a high-pitched voice that does sound strikingly like his mother. I was homeschooled until I was 17, and I can do magic just as well as anyone who went to Hogwarts. Ask your father. There's no need for you to be so far away from me. It's not natural, surrounded by strangers. Who knows what kind of families they come from? Peter rolls his eyes, leaning back in his chair and taking another massive bite of his breakfast. Did she really say all that? James asks. Peter nods, exhaling through his nose. I love her, I do, but sometimes I think that woman has completely lost the plot. But something nags at James. What'd she mean, who knows what kind of families they come from? Huh? Peter looks up, ketchup staining the corner of his mouth. Oh, I don't know. Doesn't want me hanging out with people whose parents didn't teach them manners or something. You know, troublemakers. James can't help laughing at that, biting down on the inside of his cheek to keep from being too loud. She must be thrilled you hang around us, then. Peter smiles a little shyly. Nah, she doesn't mind so much. She likes your parents. Think that helps. Serious, though? He lets out a low whistle. One look at his hair, and I heard about it for a week. Said there'd be no long-haired hippies in her house, and I better remember that. Long-haired hippie. James is in near tears. He's holding his laughter back so hard. You have to tell him she said that. He'll hate it. Peter snorts, shoveling egg into his mouth. Yeah, no thank you. Words slightly muffled by the food. The last thing I want is to have to sit there and listen to him go on a tirade about what punk is. James smirks. Good point. Speak of the devil, he says as Sirius strolls up. Aw, were you talking about me? James, really, you do need to get yourself a new hobby. This obsession is getting a bit sad. James swats at him as he sits down, but Sirius ducks out of the way, pulling 2 plates toward him. Doing one up for Remus? James asks, trying to sound casual. Sirius nods. I won't bother bringing him much, not like he can keep it down, but he's got to eat something. Toast, you reckon? James nods, turning back to his own neglected breakfast. And porridge, Peter pipes up. He likes the porridge, especially with raisins and brown sugar. Good call, Wormy, Sirius says, standing up to reach toward the breakfast foods in question. There's a noise from above, and they all look up to see the owls arriving with the morning post. Finally, James mutters, fingers itching to get his hands on a copy of the Daily Prophet, and by the looks on the faces around him, he's not the only one. You reckon they'll know anything we don't? Sirius asks, watching the ceiling along with James. He shakes his head. No idea. Hope so. James's owl drops down beside him in a flurry of dark brown wings. His name is Hoot, which James thought was hilarious when he was 11, but it doesn't suit him at all. He's a very dignified owl, always holding his head up, keeping his feathers clean. Thanks, Hoot. James takes the rolled-up paper out of his beak before tossing the owl a piece of bacon. He looks down like he's too good for it, but James doesn't miss the way he scoops it up when he flies off. Well, Sirius asks, still somewhat preoccupied, filling his 2 plates. Anything? Fly me, give me a minute, would you? James unfolds the paper and feels his stomach drop. There, on the front page, is a black and white photo of Diagon Alley. It's the emptiest James has ever seen it. The hanging shop signs the only things moving, and on the road, surrounded by broken glass and rubbish, are several bodies covered in white sheets. Jesus, that's grim, Sirius hisses, looking over his shoulder before turning back to the task at hand. James swallows, throat suddenly tight. Yeah. He flips the paper open to the article inside. Oh shit. What? They have the names of the victims, James says, eyeing a single column in front of him. They look so small written out like this. So insignificant. A whole life reduced to a line of text. James? Peter asks from across the table, sounding slightly concerned. You okay? James shakes his head, trying to get himself together. Yeah, sorry, must still be half asleep. His eyes run down the names. He has no reason to be nervous. Everyone he cares about is here or accounted for, but that doesn't seem to stop his insides from twisting themselves into knots. Most of the names he recognizes only in a distant way. A family he's heard mentioned once or twice. Someone's third cousin on their mother's side. Until... Oh. The noise comes out of James involuntarily. He feels his friends turn to him, but doesn't see it. Eyes still stuck on the page in front of him. No, is all he can think. No, that isn't fair. James? Sirius prods, food forgotten. James has his full attention now, and he does his best not to crack under it. He forces himself to turn, to hold Sirius's questioning stare. No one's ever told him how to do this. He doesn't know if there's a right way, but he's almost certain there's a wrong one. Sirius? He manages eventually, voice strained. I'm so sorry. For a moment, the confusion remains, Sirius not able to make sense of what he's just heard. And then he's ripping the newspaper out of James's hands. Who? Peter starts, but James cuts him off with one quick hand motion, watching as his best friend runs down the list of names. Watching him stop. He doesn't know what to say. He should. At this point, he should know, but words seem to have abandoned him. Sirius's hands are shaking when he puts the paper back down, elbows resting on the table as he drops his head. Eventually, he laughs, and it's wet and sad, and James feels his heart squeeze. I should have known better than to think that I could. James hears the sob creeping up Sirius's throat, hears him cut it off before it can escape. Peter grabs the paper from the other side of the table, eyes scanning down until they inevitably fall on Alfred Black, third from the bottom, one of the last bodies found. It's my fault, Sirius says suddenly, voice all wrapped around itself, twisting and pulling and ripping apart. It isn't, James says automatically. Sirius, this is not your fault. But Sirius only shakes his head, turning to look at James. It is. They said the attacks were targeted. He's never done anything except try to help me. They killed him for it. Fuck. He leans back in his chair, pressing the heels of his hands into his eyes like he can force the tears back. You have no idea why he targeted those people. No one does. How would anyone have even found out that he was writing to you? Sirius lets out a shaky breath. I don't know. He drops his hands. The only warning is his sudden stillness. A second ago, he couldn't sit still, grief pulling at his skin, and now, suddenly, stillness. Sirius, but he's out of his chair, storming toward the doors like he's being chased. Where's he going? Peter asks. James only shakes his head. No idea. And then he sees the back of Regulus's head disappearing into the corridor, and he realizes what's about to happen. Fuck. It's his turn to jolt out of his seat, jogging down the length of the Great Hall. You did, he hears Sirius say as he bursts into the foyer, turning about himself, looking for the source of the noise. I know you did. You're being irrational, Regulus says, voice flat. They're only a few paces down the hall, facing one another like they're about to duel. For the first time, Regulus isn't the one with his wand out. I bet you couldn't wait to tell her. Sirius's voice has teeth. Regulus sighs. I told you. I didn't know you were writing to Uncle Alfred, but even if I had, I wouldn't have said anything. I don't believe you. Well, that sounds like your problem, not mine. You selfish? Spineless? Okay, James steps in, grabbing hold of Sirius's arm as he steps toward his brother, whose wand, James can now see, has been Expelliarmused down the hall. That's enough, Sirius. Let's go. It was him. He pulls against James's grip. I fucking know it was. You always were such a little snitch. Tell me, did she reward you? How much was our uncle's life worth? A new broom? New robes? What'd you get on your knees for this time, Regulus? Regulus doesn't react to his brother's words, his expression completely unmoved. Is this how it's going to be, Sirius? He asks eventually, voice flat, emptied of feeling. It makes James ache. You are just going to blame me for everything that goes wrong in your life? You're not innocent, Reg. You know that, right? Just because you don't cast the spells doesn't mean you aren't every bit as guilty as them. You stand there and you let it happen. And what's the alternative? Regulus asks coldly. Regulus, James warns as the younger boy steps forward, Sirius barely restrained by James's grip. Neither of them are paying much attention to him, of course. They never can see anything but each other when they're together. Should I be like you? The younger boy asks coldly. Risk everything just so I can watch everyone I love die. Fuck you, Reg. Sirius doesn't quite manage it without his voice breaking. James can feel the pain caused by Regulus's words running through him, like they were a physical hit. He stares pleadingly at the boy he loves, willing him to look back, to stop, but his eyes are locked on his brother's. You chose this, Sirius. Something primal rips itself out of Sirius's throat as he tries to raise his wand again, tries to get free of James's grip. And honestly, James doesn't blame him. Well, well, well. What do we have here? Comes a snide voice from over James's shoulder. Christ, he mutters under his breath. Could we catch a fucking break here? Rosier and Crouch saunter toward them, taking their places at Regulus's side. Though Reg looks like he's no happier to see them than James is. You wouldn't be trying to come for our Reggie now, would you? Crouch asks, dark-eyed and pointy-faced, sneering down at them as he twirls his wand between his fingers. James already feels the overwhelming desire to punch him in the face. Leave it, Regulus says, stepping back. Let's go. But Rosier and Crouch are sharks, and they can smell blood in the water. Oh, are you upset? Rosier says in a baby voice. Did one of your muggle-loving friends get their heads blown off? Crouch snickers off to the side, and James slowly lets Sirius go, no longer sure he isn't about to whip out his own wand. I'd quit while you're ahead, Rosier, James growls, but the two Slytherins only seem to find this more amusing. You lot are going to have to get used to this, you know, especially if this is the best your side has to offer. He gives them a derisive once-over. You know, Crouch says, before James can open his mouth again, I hear some of them begged. There's a nasty glint in his eyes. Can you imagine? Begging? Fucking pathetic. That's what happens when we mix with non-magical folk. Makes you soft, Rosier chuckles. See, you lot are gonna go one by one, and you want to know why? Well, I'm sure you're gonna tell us, James replies flatly, feeling Sirius buzzing beside him, ready to go off. Rosier steps up close. Too close, really, his ugly sneer getting right in James's face. Because you have no fucking claws. James does punch Rosier in the face then, at the same moment that Sirius sends Crouch flying down the corridor. You sure about that, Rosie? James asks as he gets Rosier on the ground before driving his foot into his stomach. What do you reckon, Padfoot? I feel pretty fucking sharp, Prongs. He spells Crouch into the air before letting him drop back down again, and he lets out a high-pitched screeching noise as he crumples to the floor. Enough, Regulus snaps, at the same time that Rosier scrambles to his feet and pulls out his wand. James already has his aimed. Evan, I said enough, he growls when Rosier's wand doesn't drop. Regulus, this is not the time, Regulus bites out, Crouch only managing to peel himself off the floor. James can't quite believe that they're going to listen to him, certainly doesn't believe it enough to lower his own wand. But, to his surprise, Rosier steps back. This is a mistake, he hisses at Regulus. Your opinion has been noted. Take Barty back to the common room. At first, Rosier doesn't move, glaring menacingly at James, who honestly has no idea what's happening anymore. Fine. He spits the word out of his mouth, dragging his eyes up and down James's body one more time before he goes to help Crouch off the wall. Well done, Reg, Sirius says coldly, and James wonders if they're going to have to do this all over again. But when he looks beside him, He sees that Sirius has finally lowered his wand. Really putting the black name to good use, I see. Is it bribery, or have they just met Walburga? Regulus stares at him for a beat longer before shaking his head and turning away. Fire and ice they are. Sirius can't keep his feelings in, and Regulus can't let his out. Either way, they'll destroy themselves if they keep going. James watches Regulus disappear down the hall, trying to swallow the tempest of emotions currently warring inside him. Come on, he says eventually, nudging Sirius lightly. Let's go, yeah? But Sirius doesn't respond. Instead, he turns away and walks very determinedly toward the front doors. Sirius? James calls after him, moving to follow. Just leave me alone, James, he snaps over his shoulder. I just want to be alone. James pulls up short, watching Sirius storm out of the castle. He knows that he means it. When all is said and done, Sirius really isn't that hard to read. Still, James struggles to fight the urge to start moving again, to follow him anyway. Which isn't fair. If Sirius wants to be alone, he should be allowed to be. It's just that James wishes that wasn't what he wanted. Maybe you should go check on him, Remus says for the 100th time. James is lying on his bed, arm flung over his eyes. Is he still by the lake? He hears the sound of shuffling. Remus has been pacing back and forth in front of the window for what feels like hours. James has given up trying to get him to relax and is counting it as a win that Remus isn't trying to go after Sirius himself. No, there's the unmistakable sound of the map unfolding. He's wandering around the 3rd floor now. James nods. He's fine. He'll come get us when he needs us. But I won't. Remus shuts his mouth, frustrated. He'll be here when it matters. James stretches, pulling himself up to sitting and seeing that the sun has almost set. Speaking of which, what time is it? I don't know. I lost track, Remus says guiltily, causing James to arch his brow. Yes, I know. It's 8, Peter supplies helpfully. Well, thank Merlin someone's paying attention, James groans as he gets to his feet. Come on, Moons, I'll walk you to the infirmary. Remus scowls. I don't need you to chaperone me, James. Yeah, but I'm obsessed with you, remember? He grins as he holds the door open. Remus looks down at the map again, worrying his bottom lip between his teeth. Remus, James says softly, and eventually the other boy lifts his head. We're going to take care of him, I promise. But right now, we have to take care of you. That isn't fair to him. He needs you guys. You should stay here tonight. Don't worry about me. I've done it alone before. Peter snorts from behind the Witch's Weekly he's currently reading, ironically, on his bed. Fat chance. I'm with Pete. James cuts in before Remus can. We're all going to be there. All of us. And then afterward, we'll deal with the rest, okay? Now come on. Reluctantly, Remus does. The common room's almost empty tonight. No one feels like socializing much at the moment. Everything's just slightly off. Nothing fits right. Nothing sounds right. As much as James is trying to hide it from Remus, it kills him that Sirius hasn't come back yet, that he's stayed away this long. Maybe he should have gone after him. So, he says after a long stretch of silence. Remus looks over at him, their steps loud in the empty corridor. Lily. Ah, Remus almost smiles. I was wondering when she'd come up. James nods, shoving his hands in his pockets and not saying anything else for a bit. Do you think I should apologize? Remus arches his brow. I mean, you did beat the shit out of her best mate. Yeah, but in my defense, her best mate is Snape. Remus actually laughs at that, though it quickly turns to a cough that's bad enough they have to stop walking. Sorry, Remus croaks. Don't be. You okay to keep going? He pauses, breathing in and out a couple of times before nodding his head. Listen, Remus carries on eventually. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I don't think Snape had it coming, or that it wasn't satisfying to watch you deck him. I knew he'd corrupt you, James grins, causing Remus to roll his eyes. But that doesn't mean that you weren't still acting like a brat. James scrunches his face. Let's go back to the part where you liked that I decked him. I'm sorry, Remus snorts, but you know it's true. He called her... But James can't finish it, feeling the anger boil up in him so fast he thinks he's going to choke on it. I know, Remus says soberly. Look, give her some space, then go talk to her. You don't have to apologize for not liking Snape, but it might help if you at least admitted that trying to pants him in front of the whole school was a dick move. James lets out a melodramatic sigh as they come to a stop in front of the infirmary. Fine, I'll consider it. Remus tries to hide his smile. That's all I ask. James smiles back. Well, guess I'll see you on the other side, yeah? Yeah, guess. Remus turns to go, but pauses before he makes it inside. James? Yeah? If Sirius doesn't want to come tonight, or if he doesn't show up on time, don't give him shit for it, okay? Remus, he's going to be there. Right, the other boy allows. But if he isn't, I'm telling you now that it's okay. He gets to have tonight if he needs it, and I don't want you to make him feel guilty for that. James huffs. Yes, okay, Mum. I won't nag him if he doesn't want to, but I'm telling you, he will. Remus nods. Thank you. Of course, Moons, whatever you want. Remus arches his brow. Whatever I want, huh? In that case, I want you to fold all the... Oh no, what's that? I can't hear you. I think we're breaking up. James makes a loud static noise as he starts slowly walking backward. Remus rolls his eyes. That's what I thought. See you, James. Always a pleasure, Remus. He watches the door close and feels something heavy start to grow in the pit of his stomach. Whatever Remus says, Sirius needs to be there tonight. It's a promise they've made to each other, to Remus, to be there every time, every moon. It'll feel like a betrayal if Sirius doesn't show up now. But Sirius knows that, understands it the same way James does. All that time they spent getting Remus to trust him, to let them in, this was part of it. Being there when it's the hardest, not looking away from the scary bits, not like his parents. The full moon isn't optional for Remus. Bad day, good day, he has to go through it. And so do they, the three of them. It's their job to be there, to prove to him that it isn't optional for them either. To prove to him that he's seen, completely and utterly, and that all of him is wanted. Sirius knows that. An hour later, James is feeling less certain. Prongs? I know. James is standing by the window, invisibility cloak in one hand, foot tapping impatiently on the floor. Just give him another 5 minutes, yeah? He should have gone after him. He should have known better than to let Sirius stew in his own for this long. He should have dragged him out of that hallway before him and Regulus even got going. James sighs, passing a hand over his face and tearing his eyes away from the quickly materializing moon. Okay, I guess he's... The door swings open and Sirius waltzes in. Not angry, not flustered. He might even be... happy? James has neither the energy nor the time to make sense of that. Gents? He nods to them. Thank Merlin, James says. Thought you weren't going to make it. Come on, we've got to... I'd give it a few minutes, if I were you. And there's something off about his voice. An empty sort of cheerfulness that makes the hair on the back of James's neck stand on end. Give it a few minutes? He looks at Peter, who shakes his head, just as lost, wand at the ready to turn into Wormtail. Sirius, we're late, he says slowly. We have to go. We should have gone 20 minutes ago. But instead of grasping the urgency of the situation, Sirius drops onto his bed, crossing his arms behind his head and looking infuriatingly calm. Nah, trust me, we're going to be right on time. James really has no idea what's going on, and after floundering about it for a few seconds, finally manages to speak again. Listen, if you don't want to come tonight, Mooney says it's okay, but I really think... I ran into Snape just now, on my way back. Sirius interrupts, completely derailing James's train of thought. Okay? It feels like it did, that time in the woods, when Mooney went haywire. Wrong, James's brain keeps saying. Something's wrong. The way Sirius is talking, lying, in control and out of control at the same time. Brilliant it was, like fate, and I just saw it, saw how we could prove them wrong. He laughs and the noise finds its way in between James's rims and pulls at his lungs. Prove them wrong? Prove who wrong? James shakes his head. Never mind. Tell me later, yeah? We have to go. But Sirius just smiles. And it's an expression too sharp to be joyful. God, it's so fucking funny. So fucking funny. Ironic. Don't you see? He turns his head, looking at James properly for the first time. "See what, Pads?" he asks nervously. "They said we don't have claws," still with that same smile on his face. "But we have a fucking werewolf." The world stops. James swears the literal rotation of the earth freezes on those words, cold dripping down his spine. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Did you tell Snape about Remus? A question he never thought he'd have to ask, and somehow, Sirius is still smiling. "Better than that," he says. "I told him how to get past the tree." James is running. No invisibility cloak, no secret passageways. He runs, feet slamming into the stone floors, chest heaving with the effort. He's never moved so fast in his life, never felt so scared that he isn't even sure this is real, that he hasn't just fallen into one of his nightmares. Wake up, he thinks. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, please wake up. I told him how to get past the tree. It must have rained at some point because James slips on grass as he hurls himself across the lawn, lungs stinging with the cold air. There's always the chance that Snape didn't take the bait, that he saw it for the trap that it is, that he just minded his own fucking business for once in his miserable life. But as the willow comes into view, James knows that's not what happened. Knows from the strange way the branches are holding themselves. Someone's pressed the knot. Recently. I told him how to get past the tree. James doesn't stop, doesn't slow down, throwing himself into the passage and toward the shrieking shack, barely breathing. It's late. They were already running late. He has no time. He doesn't know what he's going to do. If he gets there and Mooney is already transformed, if he gets there and he's fuck. He bursts into the shack, breathing heavy, pulse loud in his ears as he takes the steps 2 at a time. Get out! Get out! Remus's voice is stripped bare with fear. What the hell are you playing at, Lupin? What is this place? Please, please, Snape, I'm begging you, leave. Just leave. He sounds close to tears. James throws open the door to the bedroom with such force that it slams into the wall behind it. Remus has backed himself as far away from Snape as he can get. He doesn't have his wand, of course, completely defenseless. Meanwhile, Snape has his drawn and pointed right at him. James, Remus says weakly. James, he's here. Remus doubles over, an agonizing groan ripping out of him. What the fuck is going on? Snape turns on him, pointing his wand in James' direction, but he ignores it, walking right past him and over to Remus's side. It's now, he trembles. James, it's... His voice skips like a scratched record, like he's losing control of it. It's happening now, you have to... He can't... Shh, it's okay. It's going to be okay, I promise. I'm going to take care of it. He wraps his arm around him gently as he can, but Remus still flinches as James guides him back to the mattress. What the fuck is wrong with him? Snape demands. Remus is hyperventilating, dropping his head between his knees the minute he's sitting down again, whole body shaking. You have to get... But his voice disappears, and instead, he screams. James wonders if one day that sound will stop feeling like broken glass. With a shaky breath, he turns to Snape. We have to go. Now. Snape only glares, attempting to lean around James so he can get a better look at Remus. Is he mental? Have they let a fucking psycho into Hogwarts? Okay, you're going to move, or I'm going to... James reaches into his back pocket for his wand, and keeps reaching and reaching. But there's nothing there. He forgot his wand. He forgot his wand. At that moment, he hears the unmistakable noise of bones breaking. He doesn't need to turn around. He's seen it before. He knows what's happening. And if the new expression of horror on Snape's face is anything to go by, he does too. Move, you idiot. Now. We're going now. James steps forward to grab him, but Snape jabs the tip of his wand into his chest. A werewolf? He demands. The freak is a werewolf? Move! Some horrendous noise rips itself from Remus's throat, and James sees it happen. Sees the wand move from his chest to the boy behind him. Sees Snape open his mouth. Don't you dare! He doesn't think. He just launches himself forward, tackling Snape before he can get out whatever spell he's trying to. They crash to the floor, landing hard on his shoulder. What is wrong with you? Snape's voice is high as they roll around, dust getting into James's eyes and mouth, an elbow to the face, a knee to the gut. He still ends up on top. At some point in the scuffle, Snape's wand is lost. He doesn't know where it goes. Get off me! Get off! Get off! That thing is a fucking monster! Do people know? There's going to be a fucking inquiry. They'll throw you all in Azkaban. Get off of me! I would shut your mouth. Unless you want a repeat of yesterday, asshole. Lily is not here to rescue you this time. But suddenly, Snape goes still, eyes growing to nearly twice their normal size. James nearly asks what's wrong with him when... Oh no. The screaming stopped. James looks over his shoulder and is met with a pair of glowing, yellow eyes. He tries sometimes to look for Remus in them, but he hasn't found him yet. He rolls off of Snape just as the wolf launches itself forward, Snape scrambling out after him. They're nearly out of the room when Snape jerks to a stop. "What the fuck are you doing?" James demands. "My wand." James doesn't wait, grabbing Snape by the front of his shirt and throwing him down the hall toward the stairs. "I'll buy you a new fucking wand. Now move!" He hears Moony howl behind them. The noise is loud, shaking the shack, scraping along his bones. They make it to the top of the stairs before James feels a set of sharp claws sink into his back, throwing him into Snape. They all go careening down the stairs. James manages to knock Moony off, but can't stop himself from falling the rest of the way to the bottom. Everything shakes. His hands, his head. He's pretty sure the floor underneath him is shaking. There's blood. His face, maybe? Definitely his back. Somehow he manages to push himself back onto his hands and knees. Snape is lying beside him, face down. "Snape?" He shakes him and then sees the blood by his forehead. Fuck! Fear cuts through him like a knife. "Snape! Snape! Severus! Fuck!" A growl from above draws his attention, and he looks back to see Moony standing at the top of the landing, seeming so much bigger than he ever has before, lips pulled back over his teeth. James's eyes dart around, looking for something, anything to fight with. They land on the stair banister. He hears the noise of claws on wood as he reaches for one of the posts and starts pulling. "Come on," he hisses, feeling the rotten wood give, feeling the stairs creak as Moony gets closer. "Come on." It pulls off and James spins around, wielding it like a bat. Moony is nearly on him, launching off the last step as James swings. A clean shot, right at the face. Moony lets out a whine, pulling away, but not far, and James feels his panic rising. What exactly is his plan here? How is he going to fight a werewolf with a piece of wood? How is he going to fight Moony? The wolf's hackles are up, back arched as he turns to James again, except his eyes are on the post in his hands. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." James breathes, giving the wood an experimental wave and watching Moony's eyes follow it. Admittedly, if this doesn't work, James will once again find himself defenseless in front of a werewolf. But hey, what's life without a little risk? "Okay, Moony." He waves the post around a little more. Okay, you want the stick? Huh? You want the stick, big guy?" Praying with every fiber of his being that this works. "Go get it, then." He chucks the post up onto the floor above them, and by some absolute miracle, Moony follows. James doesn't hesitate, bending down and grabbing Snape by the arms, dragging him toward the door. He can taste blood in his mouth. It feels like seconds, maybe less, before a snarl brings his attention back to the stairs. Moony glares at him for a moment, before spitting the post from beneath his teeth. Fuck. James tries to move faster, the door of the passage just behind him, but Moony is moving fast now too. Fuck. He pushes through the door, yellow eyes coming right for him. He lets Snape drop as he scrambles for the handle, slamming the door shut and sliding the metal bolt across the top. There's barely a second before he hears Moony colliding with it on the other side. He stays with his back pressed against it, breathing so heavy it hurts, sweat covering his skin. Moony growls, pawing at the door, but the lock holds. James tries to exhale, tries to get some kind of control over his heart, his eyes trailing down to the body at his feet. Snape still hasn't moved. "I swear to God, if you're dead," James murmurs, stumbling beside him, his limbs not quite working properly. He can't tell if it's from the adrenaline or the stairs, but his whole body feels numb, which is probably a blessing. He rolls Snape onto his back, pressing his ear to his chest, trying to hear past his own thundering heartbeat. "Come on, you bastard." he hisses. He feels more than he hears Snape take his next breath, his chest rising and falling under James's ear. He pulls back, looking down at the nasty gash on his forehead that slips up into his black hair, covering half his face with blood. James brings his hands to his own face, sussing out the damage. Behind him, Mooney starts howling. All right. He drops his hands, getting Snape's arm over his shoulder and hauling him onto his back. Merlin, you're heavy, he mutters as he starts to walk. It's hard, and it takes a lot longer than it should. James is pretty sure he's got some nasty bruises along his ribs and shoulder because every time Snape shifts on his back, he feels a burning pain down his side. He prays to Godric the wanker doesn't wake up. The last thing he needs is to have to deal with a hysterical Snape making things difficult. By the time he drags himself out of the Whomping Willow, he's sweating and shaking and only just makes it past the tree branches before dropping Snape into the grass, hissing at the sharp pain that shoots through his shoulder. Holy shit! He looks up and sees Peter and Sirius coming toward him from across the lawn. Even in the near pitch black, he can tell that Sirius isn't smiling anymore. Holy shit, Prongs, Peter repeats. How's Remus? What happened? Sirius asks beside him, sounding nervous. James ignores him, looking only at Peter. I need you to go calm him down. He's right by the door, so you'll have to transform before you go. Peter has only barely opened his mouth to respond when Sirius steps forward. I'll go. The hell you will. With everything left in him, James shoves Sirius back. You stay the fuck away from him. Sirius blinks, eyes big and swimming in the moonlight. He looks lost. And for once in his life, James doesn't care. Peter, go. By myself? Peter squeaks. James gives him a look that is apparently enough of an answer, because he doesn't bother arguing again, transforming into a rat and running toward the tree with his wand in his mouth. The quiet is heavy, Sirius and James just staring at one another, James still breathing hard. He doesn't know what he looks like. He imagines not good. James, Sirius says weakly, pleadingly, and it makes James angry. What the fuck is wrong with you? He snaps. How could you do that? How could you be so fucking selfish? He watches Sirius flinch, curling in on himself. I don't know, he whispers. You don't know? He's not sure he's ever heard himself sound so cold. Well, that's brilliant, Sirius, really. Just thought it'd be funny, huh? A good laugh? Another one of your spontaneous pranks? Sirius isn't looking at him anymore, eyes on the ground. Did he see? He asks eventually, nodding to Snape. Isn't that what you wanted? Sirius grimaces, but doesn't move his gaze from Snape's motionless form, like he's trying to convince himself it's really there. We could wipe his memory. Wipe his memory, James repeats slowly, feeling cracked open. You know how to do that, do you? I could figure it out. He looks up at James. I know I could. James lets out an empty laugh, the noise bouncing around them in the dark. And then what? It'll be like it never happened? You gonna wipe Remus's memory too? Mine? Pete's? Sirius's eyes go wide, his mouth opening helplessly without any sound coming out. Suddenly, James is exhausted. He doesn't want to deal with this. Doesn't know how. It's illegal, he says finally, bending down to pick Snape up again. I'm not going to Azkaban just so you don't have to deal with what a shitty person you are. He brushes past him and toward the castle. Where are you taking him? Sirius asks, jogging beside him. Infirmary. James, he'll talk, you know he will, and then Remus... Yes, I know. James has to stop again, struggling to keep himself contained, to keep himself from falling out of the holes torn in his skin. Sirius is looking at him with shocked eyes. James has never yelled at him like that before. He's not sure he's ever yelled at anyone like that. I'm going to talk to Dumbledore. His voice trembles with the effort to remain steady. He went through all the trouble of letting Remus in. He's not going to let Snape ruin that. He starts walking again. He can feel Snape's blood soaking into his shoulder. Okay, yeah, you might be right. I'll come with you. No. James, I'm sorry. Maybe I wasn't clear earlier. When I said stay the fuck away from him, I also meant stay the fuck away from me. James, please. I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You just weren't thinking? James demands. You're unbelievable. You know it's going to break his heart, right? He stops again, turning to face Sirius fully. I mean, it would have if it was any of us, but the fact that it was you. You. James's voice breaks as he grits his teeth in frustration. It's going to destroy him when he finds out. For a minute, Sirius just stands there, looking small. And then, I don't know why it matters that it was me, he says thinly. James drops his head, letting out a long exhale. Yeah, he says dryly, looking up again. Sure you don't. He turns around and keeps walking. He hears his name one more time, but doesn't stop. Poppy Pumphrey stands in front of him in a housecoat and slippers, hair braided down her back, her wand currently providing the only light in the room. James Potter, you better have a good reason for waking me up at... She pauses, squinting. Is that blood? With one flick of her wand, all the lamps in her office light, and she steps forward, bringing her hands to his face, inspecting the damage. Is it bad? I haven't seen it yet. James, what happened? Apparently, in her shock, last names have gone out the window. It's a long story. Listen, he steps gently out of her grasp. I'm fine, it's Snape you need to look at. She blinks. Snape? Severus Snape? James nods, leading her back out into the infirmary where he left Snape on one of the empty beds. Merlin, she hisses under her breath, moving quickly to his side. James, what on earth happened to you? Her eyes are on the body in front of her, wand running up and down, casting so quickly James can't keep track. He sighs, sitting on the chair next to the bed and wiping at his bleeding nose. He got in. Got in? She asks distractedly, muttering something over Snape's head. He watches her wearily, hoping it looks worse than it is, that it'll be an easy fix. Remus will never forgive himself otherwise. Yeah, James croaks. Yeah, he got into the shack. Her hands still. Her whole body stills, really, eyes flicking up to meet his for the first time. The shack? She repeats. James nods. Remus did this? Not on purpose, but yeah. He sees the fear in her eyes as they bounce back and forth between him and Snape, reassessing their injuries. He didn't bite us. You're sure? James nods. This was the stairs, mostly. He motions to himself. And Remus? He knows that she cares for him. Maybe almost as much as James does. He's still there, locked in. He'll be okay, or, well, he's not hurt too badly anyway, I don't think. We didn't have our wands. James feels his stomach squirm, but he pushes all the thoughts of how very not okay Remus is going to be out of his head. There are still hours until sunrise, and if he thinks about it too much, he'll lose it. You didn't have your wands? She repeats slowly, face paling. She just stares at him for a moment before eventually shaking her head. I have to get the headmaster in your heads of house. She looks at him and then quickly waves her wand. James feels the tingling sensation of her diagnostic charms. You should be okay to wait. Nothing severe. She starts moving away when James calls her back. He'll be all right? He asks, gesturing to Snape. She pauses a moment and then nods. A concussion, that's all. He'll have to take a potion in the morning for the next week, and then he should be good as new. James exhales, feeling his whole body relax. Okay, well, at least there's that. You did good, James, she says, voice softening. A minute later, he hears the infirmary door closing behind her. James passes a hand over his face and winces as he brushes against the cuts on his cheek and forehead. He gives Snape a lingering look, hair now stuck to his face as the blood dries, robes covered in dust and dirt. He hates him. He's not sure if he's right to in this moment, but he does. It's easier than hating Sirius. Eventually he gets up, moving to a chair across the room so he doesn't have to look at him anymore. He leans his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. He hopes that Peter actually went into the shack and isn't just waiting outside. He hopes that him being there helps get Mooney to relax. He hurts himself when he's worked up, especially when he's trapped. He very determinedly doesn't think about Sirius. or where he is, or what he's going to say when he sees him next. The numbness of before is wearing off, and everything aches and twinges, and he's tired, so fucking tired. He has to figure out what he's going to tell Remus, how he's going to stop him from reverting back to first year, to a boy who smiles politely but doesn't say much, doesn't trust anyone to give any part of himself away. Potter? James blinks his eyes open, not remembering hearing anyone come in. The world is blurry for a minute, but slowly, a looming McGonagall comes into view, mouth pursed, tartan housecoat wrapped tightly around herself. "Are you all right?" she asks, somehow managing to sound both concerned and brisk at the same time. Sure." He pulls himself up straighter, wincing at the tightness of his muscles. The infirmary is fully lit now, the curtains drawn around Snape's bed. He must have fallen asleep. Behind McGonagall are Dumbledore and Slughorn, both staring at James expectantly, while Pomfrey flits in and out in the background, moving between her office and Snape's bedside. James doesn't like where this is going at all. "How precisely," McGonagall presses on, clearly not in the mood for small talk, "did you and Snape find yourselves in the Shrieking Shack?" James blinks up at her. "Oh, right. Questions." The Whomping Willow, because he figures the more literal his answers are, the safer he'll be. She arches her eyebrow. "And how did you know that the tree was an entrance?" Remus told them, but James isn't about to tell her that. So instead, he shrugs. Can't remember. He thinks he hears Dumbledore chuckle in the background, but he can't be sure. "Really?" McGonagall says slowly. "You can't remember." This is a time-tested method of the Marauders. When in doubt, amnesia is always an excellent defense. "Nope." "I see," she exhales mightily. "And why, may I ask, were you trying to get into the Shrieking Shack at all?" He meets her eyes, gaze steady. "I went to stop Snape." "To stop Snape? Stop him from what?" Really, he thinks? Is she really going to make him say it? "Professor," he says meaningfully. "He's one of my best mates. We've shared a room for 5 years. You don't think I've noticed that he always gets sick around the full moon?" She looks more surprised by this revelation than he expected her to. Pomfrey, of course, now standing still in the background, does not appear the least bit shocked. "For how long have you known about Lupin's condition?" "In for a penny, in for a pound." "Second year." Not that he wasn't bloody suspicious in first year, but if they were going by the first time they got Remus to admit it, that was second year, just before Christmas. "Is it sunrise yet?" James asks suddenly, even though he knows the interrogation isn't over. He's not sure how long he's been asleep. He looks around McGonagall, trying to see the window. "Not yet," Pomfrey offers. "Another hour still, then I'll go get him." James nods, turning his attention to Dumbledore. "You have to protect him." "Potter," McGonagall starts, but as much as he likes her, and he does, he's not interested in manners or rules. Not right now. He looks Dumbledore dead in the eye. "Snape is going to spread this around to whoever will listen, and you have to stop him. You have to make sure that doesn't happen." Dumbledore's blue eyes twinkle in the candlelight. "I've protected him so far, have I not?" he says after a brief pause. "I don't know," James says, because he doesn't. As far as he can tell, Remus has protected himself. "But I need your word that you'll protect him now." He can feel Dumbledore's attention like a hand on his shoulders, fingers digging in, squeezing, looking for something. But James doesn't back down, doesn't blink. "You have it. Of course, Snape will be made well aware of the importance of Lupin's privacy, and what the consequences will be if he violates it." Now, Dumbledore," Slughorn pipes up. "Let's not forget Severus is the victim in all of this." Dumbledore looks over him, passively. "I dare say that there have been several victims tonight, due largely to Snape's curiosity." James nearly laughs at the look of outrage on Slughorn's face. "But how did he know at all about the shack?" bringing all eyes back to James. He doesn't know why he lies. Stupid, really, when Snape will no doubt rat Sirius out the moment he's conscious. And honestly, serve Sirius right. He's not interested in protecting him. Not this time. But for some reason, he just can't make himself. Sorry, I don't know. McGonagall stares at him, as if expecting him to crack under the pressure of her disapproval. In fairness, he's sure it's worked for her in the past. But James doesn't even fidget. You can return to your room now, Potter, she says eventually. Try to get some sleep. But James shakes his head. I'm not going anywhere. Remus will be in good hands, James, Dumbledore says calmly. You have nothing to worry about. He smiles, but James doesn't smile back. With all due respect, sir, he leads forward, clasping his hands between his knees. One of my best friends just had to live through his worst nightmare. If you think there's any way I'm going to let him wake up alone, you don't know me very well. He feels the other 3 adults staring at him, a new tension falling over the room. James isn't stupid. He knows who Dumbledore is, knows he's much more than the headmaster of a school. He's heard the things his parents have said, the way they look up to him. And he does too. Honestly, he has the chocolate frog card and everything. But he'll fight him if he needs to. Eventually, Dumbledore smiles again. Quite right, he says. Minerva? Horace? He nods in the direction of Madame Pomfrey's office. A word? McGonagall does not at all look pleased about the way things have gone, but with one last look at James, she allows herself to be herded away, leaving him and Pomfrey alone again. Here, she says, stepping closer. Let's do something about that face, shall we? He nods, not paying much attention to the waves of magic that wash over him. Some of it hurts, but it registers in a distant way, not really feeling it properly. Eyes staying, the whole time, on the brightening sky outside the window. Do you know what they're talking about in there? James asks after a while, nodding his head in the direction of her office. Pomfrey makes a tisking noise. No doubt trying to figure out how to keep the Ministry out of this. James snaps his head out of her hands. The Ministry? Why would the Ministry get involved? She huffs, clearly unhappy to have her work interrupted. Well, they like to keep a rather tight rein on, werewolves? She frowns. You can say it, I don't think it makes him feel better when people act like it's a dirty word. It's just a part of him, that's all. Not bad, not good. Just there. He's worried for a moment that she's going to argue with him. He doesn't have much patience for people having a go at Remus on a good day. He certainly doesn't have the ability to handle it well right now. He's lucky to have you, she says eventually. James lets that sit with him for a moment before he shrugs. Actually, I think we're the ones lucky to have him. She smiles softly at him, and together they watch the sun come up. When Pomfrey comes back from the shack an hour later, it's with an unconscious Remus floating beside her, and James is up and at his side immediately. This isn't right, he says anxiously, keeping his voice down so the others won't hear. He should be awake. Pomfrey sets him a sidelong look as he folds back the covers of the nearest bed and lowers Remus into it. It used to happen a lot before. Before? She nods, tucking Remus in. When he was younger, it would take him quite a bit longer to wake up. Right until the latter half of his second year, I would say. She sends him a meaningful look across the bed. But James still doesn't understand. Why, though? He whispers, taking the chair beside Remus's bed. She exhales, running her wand over him and fixing the smaller nicks and bruises before brushing the hair back from his forehead. There's not much work that's been done on lycanthropy, but from what I can tell, it helps if you want to wake up, want to come back to yourself. James isn't sure which part of him that hurts more, the fact that 11-year-old Remus didn't want to wake up, or the fact that 15-year-old Remus doesn't want to wake up. Without thinking, he reaches out and takes Remus's hand. Is he? James swallows. I had to hit him to get away. Is he? He's all right. A few bruised ribs, nothing he hasn't had before. which James knows is meant to be comforting, but isn't at all. Right. He squeezes Remus's hand a little more tightly. Just give him time, James, she says as she goes to leave, closing the curtains around them. James is glad that none of the others come in, glad that when Remus wakes up, he won't be surrounded by a bunch of unwelcome faces. It's strange thinking about it now. That Christmas in second year, James and Sirius had been certain for months, but Peter still wasn't convinced. What if we're wrong? He'd worried. What if he gets offended? But all they'd cared about was being right, being clever enough, observant enough to spot it. They teased Remus about being a swap, but the truth is, it was James and Sirius who were obsessed with being the brightest and the most talented, top of the class, who wanted to be seen. They hadn't once considered what it would mean for Remus, for people to know, or how unfair it was, not to let him tell them himself. The day before they were due to leave on Christmas break, the four of them had been in their room packing. It had been Sirius's idea, because of course it had. "Oi, Remus," he called out. "Want to throw me the cufflinks on my dresser?" Sirius had been sitting on his bed, mountains of clothes piled around him. "I think that might be the poshest thing anyone's ever asked me," Remus laughed, missing the meaningful look exchanged between James and Sirius, Peter standing nervously by the window. Almost as soon as he touched the cufflinks, he recoiled. "Ow, what?" He clutched his hand to his chest, face going ashen as he looked at them more closely. Silver. They were silver. James and Sirius thought they were so clever. It made him feel a bit sick to think about it now, how triumphant they had felt. Look at us, they had thought. We figured it out. "Something you want to tell us, Remus?" Sirius had said, grinning, while Remus stared between the three of them in horror. It was just static. They shocked me," he stuttered. "Come on, we're not that dim." James was off his bed at that point, leaning against the dresser next to Remus. "We are right, aren't we? Gone every full moon, can't touch silver, and the scars, they aren't that noticeable." It had come out of him like a reflex, something Remus had no doubt spent his childhood being reassured of. An age-old insecurity he was trying to talk himself out of. Not that James or Sirius picked up on it at the time. "They're wicked is what they are," Sirius said. For some reason, that hadn't made Remus feel any better. "Please," he begged. "Please." And suddenly, James has a horrible sense of déjà vu, having just heard that exact same plea echoing through the halls of the shrieking shack. They had been young, only 12. They couldn't understand. Couldn't even begin to understand all the things that Remus had been through, all that he had to be afraid of. It had seemed fun to them, like a superpower, a party trick. But they aren't those kids anymore. They know better now. They've seen enough to know better. So how did this happen? How did they end up here? "James?" James opened his eyes, not realizing he had closed them in the first place, finding Remus wide-eyed and awake. "James." This time his name is a desperate sound. "Fuck, what happened? Snape was there. Hey, James says gently, squeezing his hand. "It's okay. Everything is okay." Which isn't really true, but he's not sure what else to say. "He was there," Remus says again, his voice a wrecked thing, and he looks at James like he wants him to tell him he's wrong, that he made it up, that none of it happened. And James wishes he could, more than anything. "Yeah," he says pointlessly. "Yeah, Moons. He was there." Please. He saw. He knows? James can hear voices on the other side of the curtains and silently begs the universe just to give them a little more time before the adults come in with their questions and accusations. He knows. Remus's chest hitches, and for a second, James thinks he's stopped breathing altogether. But then he starts jerkily nodding his head. "Okay," he says, sounding anything but. Okay, so I'm gonna have to leave." He isn't looking at James anymore. "That's okay. I can take my owls at home by post, and then, I don't know, I'll get a job, I guess. A muggle job where no one will know me, and that's okay. I can do that. Moons, Remus." James yanks on his hand, pulling him back. You're not being expelled. He'll tell everyone, James. He uses his free hand to try and wipe away the tears, now sneaking from his eyes. And once he does, they won't let Dumbledore keep me here. But that's okay. I never should have been here in the first place, really. This was all a bit of a gift anyway. Hey, no, stop that. None of this is happening, okay? Remus, look at me. And he does, with eyes that say he's spent his life cutting away pieces of himself, trying to carve out the person he thinks the world wants. I've talked to Dumbledore. He's going to make sure Snape keeps his mouth shut. You're not going anywhere, okay? Remus seems to swallow with difficulty. Dumbledore said that. James nods. He's probably going to come through those curtains any minute and explain it to you himself. James squeezes his hand again. You're not going anywhere, okay? I promise. It takes a minute for that to sink in, for Remus to accept it, even a little bit, and James watches as he sits back against his pillows. Snape's okay? He asks in a small voice. Completely fine, I'm sorry to report. Remus doesn't acknowledge the joke. I didn't hurt him. I didn't hurt you. Pushed us down the stairs, but other than that, nah, you're a puppy, really. Remus lets out a noise somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Fuck, James. He finally pulls his hand free, bringing it up to his face. How did this happen? How did he know? And oh, how James has been dreading this question. For some reason, he can't get Sirius's face out of his head. The way he looked in second year when he thought of the cufflinks. And then somehow that smile turns into the one he'd had in the dorm room. All teeth. All pain. That's always been the problem with Sirius Black. He's all light or all dark, with no in between. James, Remus's hands have fallen back into his lap. You know, don't you? He wants to lie. He desperately wants to lie. Yeah, it's rough and frayed. He clears his throat. Yeah, I know. Serious. He has to force it out, because otherwise he doesn't think he'll ever be able to say it. What? He can already hear the horror in Remus's voice. Sirius told him how to get past the tree. Please. Remus just stares at him, like maybe if he's still enough, the words won't find him, and then he won't have to deal with it. But why? His voice cracks, and James can see him fighting tooth and nail to keep it together. Why would he do that? His voice is barely there, breathless, chest starting to heave again. Short, jerky inhales. Just breathe, Remus, okay? I need you to breathe. But he doesn't think Remus is listening to him. Why would he do that? Please. James shakes his head, feeling helplessly cracked. I don't know. I'm sorry, Remus. I'm so sorry. And James knows then that he will never be able to hate Sirius Black. Because he doesn't. But oh, how he wants to. Chapter notes. Hello, beautiful people. I realized that for a Regulus fic, there was very little Regulus in this chapter, but I promise our boy will be back next chapter. Honestly, it doesn't really matter how many times I read it. The prank gets me every time. Like the betrayal. Serious, BB. Please. Why? Thank you for your wonderful comments. Hope you're having a great day /evening/night. It's late here. IDK if you can tell. I am tired. Chapter 14. James spends the day in the infirmary with Remus. They don't talk much. Peter brings their schoolwork and breakfast, stays for a while. Have you seen him? James asks as Peter's leaving. They walk away from Remus's bed, talking quietly by the door. Peter nods. He's in the room. He's asked about Remus. He wanted to come, but I thought it would be a bad idea. James nods. Thanks. See you at dinner? Peter asks hopefully. Maybe. He pats him on the shoulder before heading back to Remus, who's been burying himself in a history book for the last hour. Moons? He asks tentatively, leaning against the end of the bed. Remus's eyes flick up briefly before dropping back down. Everything about his posture is closed off. Since their conversation this morning, he's been nearly silent. James doesn't blame him. Not at all, but he hates it. I just have to do something real quick, but I'll be back soon, okay? There's silence, and then Remus sighs. You don't have to be here, James, he says quietly, eyes not lifting from the page in front of him. I know, but I want to be. They've already had this conversation several times this morning, and James doesn't think that either of them feels like getting into it again. I'll be back, he repeats, and this time Remus just nods his head. Before he makes it out of the infirmary, he casts a look at the bed a few paces away. According to Pumphrey, Snape is awake now. James knows that he's talked to Dumbledore, knows that he told them all that Sirius was the one who told him about the Whomping Willow, which, of course, led to James being interrogated again. He feels a bit wary of leaving Remus alone with him, even knowing Pumphrey is just in her office and that Snape hasn't gotten his wand back yet. This won't take long, though, and if he wants to do it, he has to go now. So, reluctantly, he pushes through the door and into the corridor. Pumphrey told Remus he was well enough to return to the dorms if he wanted to. He didn't. James wasn't surprised, and he doesn't blame him. He doesn't want to go back there either, if he's being honest. But he can't have Remus hiding out in the infirmary for the rest of the year. Professor, James says, tentatively knocking on the open door to McGonagall's office. She looks up from the paperwork on her desk, brows drawing together at the sight of him. Potter? He steps further into the room. Can I talk to you for a minute? She only pauses briefly before gesturing to the seat in front of her. He sits on the edge, not intending to get comfortable. He doesn't want to be here long. She leans forward across her desk, fingers weaving together as she waits patiently for him to continue. Is Sirius going to be expelled? For some reason, those words feel like nails being dragged up his throat. He wouldn't fight it, if it happened. It would be right after what he'd done. But the thought still breaks his heart. They've always been together, the four of them, ever since they first met. And if he's being honest, James had never thought that would change. Not as they got older or left Hogwarts. It felt like this unquestionable law of the universe. The Marauders belonged together. Always. I'm afraid it is not my place to discuss that with you, McGonagall says after a long pause. James nods. He'd been expecting that, but he figured he'd try anyway. Well, if he isn't, he presses on, I think he should be moved to a new dorm. He says it very matter of fact, like it doesn't shred him on the inside. He can't really think about it, about what he's asking, because if he does, he won't do it. I see, McGonagall says carefully. It is not commonplace to remove students from their dorms. This isn't exactly a common situation, though, is it? She dips her head in acknowledgement, but doesn't say anything else. James sighs. Look, it isn't fair to Remus to make him face him like that, have to see him every day. He deserves to feel safe. And how will he ever feel safe if he has to share a room with the person who betrayed him, lied to him, used him, broke his heart? James isn't sure how to best sum up what Sirius did. McGonagall nods slowly. I'll see what I can do. There are no more available beds, but if I can find someone willing to switch with him, would that be acceptable to you? Yes, James says quickly, even though the thought makes his stomach clench. Having someone else in their room, in Sirius's bed. Yes, that would be acceptable. Good. He gets out of his chair, anxious to get back to Remus. You're still with Mr. Lupin in the infirmary, I imagine, McGonagall says as he turns to leave. Yeah? She nods. Best that you stay there. The parents will be arriving soon. James's heart plummets into his stomach. The parents? An hour later, James finds himself in Dumbledore's office with Remus, Sirius, and Snape. It is maybe the most awkward he has ever felt in his entire life. None of them speak. None of them even look at each other. Sirius is sunk low in his chair, eyes on the floor, a sick expression on his face. Snape, sitting rimrod straight, face pale, eyes unwavering on the headmaster. James separates them from Moony, whom he sneaks glances at every few seconds, but Remus's face is unreadable, wiped clean of the pain of this morning. And while he understands why, part of James wants him to drop it. Let them see. Let them see how much fucking damage they've done. As much as he was dreading the arrival of the parents, it's almost a relief when McGonagall opens the door. The tension was starting to make his skin itch. Boys. His mom is the first one through, dressed in Muggle clothing. She usually is when she's at home. Blue jeans, white floral blouse. He's sure Snape will be bringing that up at some point. Mum. James doesn't know if he should stand up or not, but his mother doesn't really give him the chance. She's almost instantly in front of them. Remus, love, She kisses the top of his head. "All right?" she asks softly. James can see him swallow. "Yes, Mrs. Potter." "It's Effie, darling." She kisses his head one more time before moving on to James, the other parents still filing in, somewhat less determinedly than Euphemia Potter. She takes his face in her hands, kissing him as well, of course, on the forehead, the cheek, the top of his mess of hair. "Mom," he says, exasperated, except that the truth is, he's so glad she's here. Now that he can feel her and see her, glad that someone else can take control of the situation, because James honestly doesn't know what to do with it. His mother presses her forehead to his. "You're okay?" she asks, in the same soft voice she used on Remus. James wonders if it's actually some kind of spell, the way it calms him down instantly. Yeah, I'm okay." She nods, forehead rubbing against his as she pulls away. James isn't sure if he was expecting Wahlberga to come or not, but she isn't there. Snape's mother is, a mousy woman with brown hair and nervous eyes, and the Lupins, coming to stand at their son's side, Hope looking nervous, whispering something in Remus's ear, Lyle looking tired. James assumes Fleamont's at work. "Oh, Sirius," he sees his mother coo, turning to see her crouched in front of his best friend, trying to meet his eye. It takes James a moment to realize that Sirius is crying and trying desperately to hide it. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's okay. We'll sort it out. I promise." Sirius just shakes his head, letting out a shaky breath as he quickly wipes his eyes on his sleeve. James is angry and sad at the same time, and he isn't at all sure what to do with that. Mostly, he wishes his mother would stop acting like all Sirius did was break a dish or cheat on a test, instead of putting two people's lives at risk. Dumbledore clears his throat, and Euphemia stands, moving to stand behind their chairs, one hand on Sirius and one hand on James. "You've all been informed on what transpired last night." McGonagall is standing beside him. "Does the minister know you kept a werewolf at this school?" Mrs. Snape has a high, reedy voice, and James clenches his teeth. "They don't keep him, Eileen," Euphemia answers before Dumbledore can. "He's a student. He attends Hogwarts just like everyone else." Her voice is light. There's an undeniable sharpness to her words. "Leave it, Effie," James hears Lyle mutter beside them, which almost makes James angrier. Remus looks as though he's trying to cave in on himself. "It would seem," Dumbledore presses on, "that Sirius and Severus took a game of chicken a bit too far." "I didn't know there was going to be a werewolf in there," Snape says sulkily. James thinks if someone refers to Remus as a werewolf one more time, he's going to lose it. Dumbledore's cool blue eyes fall on the Slytherin. "That is true. You did know, however, that both the Willow and the Shack were off limits, correct?" Snape scowls. "Yes. And, do forgive me, but while Mr. Black did not tell you exactly what you were walking into, I do believe he made it clear that it wasn't a surprise party, correct?" Snape doesn't answer this time, just glares. "Therefore, you did make the decision to enter a dangerous situation, even if you were not entirely aware of how dangerous it was, in order to prove yourself to Mr. Black?" Snape scoffs. "I don't need to prove anything to him." Dumbledore smiles. "To satisfy your own curiosity, then. Either way, while Mr. Black certainly enticed you, he did not force you to do anything. Or am I mistaken?" There are several long seconds of silence before Snape finally answers. "That's correct." "I'm glad we can all agree." There is something slightly off about Dumbledore's cheerfulness, something dangerous, that makes the hair stand up on the back of James's neck. Then you will understand why I have decided to take 100 points from Slytherin. Snape's mouth literally falls open. "And give you detention with Professor McGonagall every weekend for the rest of term." "This is ridiculous," his mother sparks up again. "That thing attacked my son." She points a bony finger in Remus's direction. James moves to stand, ready to take this woman apart, but his mother pushes him back down. "I'll kindly ask you not to refer to my students as things, Eileen," McGonagall says coldly. "And I'll ask less kindly," Euphemia adds, earning her a barely repressed smirk from McGonagall. "Yes, I think you will find this is still my school, Mrs. Snape." Dumbledore seems unfazed by all of this. If you disagree with my methods, feel free to remove your son from the premises. James sees the sudden fear in Snape's eyes, and he grabs hold of his mother's wrist, just as she opens her mouth to speak again. Leave it, Mum. Please. It's fine. She looks down, seemingly startled that her son has spoken to her, and then back up at Dumbledore. Fine, she hisses, crossing her arms over her chest. But I want it known that I think it's absolutely barbaric that... Yes, we've noted you. Euphemia cuts her off. You're outnumbered, Eileen. Bow out gracefully. James thinks there's a very good chance that Snape's mum is going to combust. Her face somehow manages to grow even more pinched, her high cheeks flushing a bright and unattractive red. Once again, Dumbledore appears unbothered by the squabbling. Excellent. His gaze moves on to Sirius. Now, Mr. Black, this whole situation does seem to start with you, doesn't it? Sirius says nothing, head still down, which makes James somehow angrier. He shoots a worried look over to Remus, who's sitting with his shoulders rolled in, like he's trying to pull as far away from his parents as he can without actually getting out of his chair, eyes very determinedly on his hands. James hopes Dumbledore puts them all out of their misery soon, because this was really the last thing Moony needed. It has been decided that you will remain at school. I'm not being expelled, Sirius croaks, the first words he's spoken. No, Dumbledore says softly, but you will be removed from the Gryffindor Quidditch team. That hits James surprisingly hard, maybe because he hadn't really thought that far ahead. Thought of what the day-to-day was going to look like after this. And you will be serving detentions for the remainder of the term, like Mr. Snape, with Professor McGonagall. I will also be taking 100 points from Gryffindor. Sirius swallows, nodding along to all of this, face pale. And you will be moving dorms. What? Sirius looks like he didn't mean to let the word out, and James's eyes shoot to McGonagall, who gives him a slight nod. After the events of last night, it has been deemed inappropriate for you to continue to share a dorm with Mr. Lupin. So Frank Longbottom has agreed to switch with you. James does his best not to be bitter about the fact that this means Sirius will be getting his own room. The alternative would be Moony switching with Frank, and if he's honest, the last thing he wants is for Remus to be isolated. I have to leave my room, Sirius says, somewhere between dazed and heartbroken. James makes a scoffing noise that earns him a squeeze from his mother's hand, but he doesn't care. He feels Sirius's eyes on him, but refuses to feel bad. Moony could have died. He could have killed Snape, which honestly, for Remus, would have been worse. Yes, McGonagall answers Sirius after a brief pause, for the safety of everyone involved. You think I'm unsafe? Sirius's voice breaks. Surely that isn't necessary. The hell it isn't, James. But he had had just about enough of listening to a bunch of people who have no idea what they're talking about, acting like they have any right to decide what happens here. He put Remus at risk. He could have been hurt. Snape had his wand on him when I got there. James feels something slightly hysterical clawing at his chest, like everything he couldn't feel last night is bubbling to the surface. He's always loved the way his mother takes care of everyone, the way she protects Sirius, but there are things that are unforgivable. Maybe James doesn't hate Sirius, but he sure as hell doesn't like him very much. These are people's lives we're talking about. He looks at Sirius for the first time, and the other boy stares back, eyes wide. They aren't fucking toys. They don't exist for your amusement. James, his mother tries again, but it's too late. He's on a roll. I mean, house points? He turns to Dumbledore. Detention? This is a fucking joke. What would you suggest, James? Dumbledore asks calmly. Anything. Something. This is a crime. You can't just allow them to treat people like this. James? Euphemia tries to calm her son down for the third time. You weren't there! He's never shouted at her before. You weren't there. You didn't have to. His voice falls to pieces in his mouth. You weren't there. He closes his eyes for a second, trying to get a hold of all of the feelings forcing their ways to the surface, trying to rip his skin apart. That must have been very scary for you, Dumbledore says eventually, to find your friend in such a vulnerable position. James exhales, and after several seconds, voices his eyes open again. You know what was scary, Professor? He says, as flatly as he can manage, watching my best mate smile while he told me what he'd done. A pained noise comes from Sirius, but James ignores it. McGonagall was right. It is safer for all of us if he's on his own. His mother squeezes his shoulder, but doesn't bother objecting again. There's an eerie silence now, and James almost regrets freaking out on everyone. Except he can't quite shake the feeling that they deserved it. The Lupins have agreed to not press charges, Dumbledore goes on eventually. They've decided not to press charges, Eileen interjects. It's my son who's been attacked here. As we already discussed, Dumbledore goes on in an extraordinarily patronizing tone. Since your son quite knowingly put himself in danger, you would hardly have a case. She makes an affronted noise, but Dumbledore's attention has already returned to Remus. Given all that has happened, we have told your parents you are more than welcome to go home for a period of time to rest and recover. James sees Remus stiffen in his chair. No, he says almost too quickly. I want to stay. I want to be here. Please. Hope worries her bottom lip, fingers fidgeting with her sleeve. Are you sure, Rem? It might be good for... He said he doesn't want to. Lyle cuts his wife off, sounding more tired than anything else. Stop fussing over him and leave it be. Dumbledore is still focused on Remus. You are sure that's what you want? He asks him. It is, still without hesitation. Very well. Then the last order of business is to collect the memory from James. James blinks. What? The Ministry, while agreeing to allow us to handle this internally, needs confirmation that the events occurred as we have described. That Mr. Lupin was in fact safely secured. James sees Remus flinch out of the corner of his eye. And there was no unprovoked attack, no mauling of you or Mr. Snape. Since you are the only witness to the entirety of last night's events, your memory is needed. Remus once again curls in on himself. James grits his teeth. Okay, fine, whatever. His mother squeezes his shoulder. I'll be right here, she says comfortingly. The rest of you are free to go. Professor McGonagall will show you out. James hears the others shuffling, chairs being pushed back, floorboards squeaking, but he isn't looking at them. He's looking at Dumbledore, who pulls out a vial and places it on the desk in front of him. Now that the room is empty, there is suddenly space for James' fear, and he feels it creeping up his spine, pricking his heart. Will it hurt? He asks, eyes still on the vial. No, Dumbledore says calmly. James nods, getting to his feet and walking forward. He can feel his mother following behind him as he picks up the glass tube, cold in his hands. Will they be able to hear my thoughts? What I was thinking when it happened? The thought makes a vaguely sick feeling wash over him. A bunch of Ministry lackeys listening to him run around, terrified. No, Dumbledore says again. They will view the memory as a third-party observer. The perspective change is part of what makes the pensive so useful. James swallows, throat dry as he pulls out his wand. He looks up at Dumbledore one last time. Will I forget, once it's out of me? Dumbledore takes his time now, eyes running James over. James used to think that those blue eyes were kind, safe. But these last few hours, he's looked at them too many times to believe that anymore. There's something underneath the playfulness, something cold and calculated. It makes James shiver. Would you like that? He asks finally, not answering James's question. Albus, he hears his mother warn from behind them, but Dumbledore doesn't take it back. His stare doesn't falter. I don't know, James answers truthfully. No, I guess. I wish it hadn't happened, but since it did, I'd rather know. Dumbledore smiles softly. Ignorance is peace, but knowledge is freedom. James stares back at him blankly, and eventually Dumbledore chuckles to himself. You won't forget, he goes on. It may fade slightly, feel less vibrant, but it'll stay there. Okay. James brings the tip of his wand to his temple. Good. It does hurt. Dumbledore is a dirty liar. Or maybe it isn't the spell. Maybe it's just the memory. The night before runs through him at double speed, and he feels every second of it. Every scratch, every crack in his heart, every scream out of Mooney's mouth. It tears itself from him, violently and unwillingly, claws digging in as he attempts to pour it into the vial, his hands shaking. I told him how to get past the tree. Please, please. A werewolf? The freak is a werewolf? James, please, I just wasn't thinking. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. He nearly drops it, gasping as the last of the night bleeds out of him. His mother instantly steps forward, placing the vial on Dumbledore's desk before wrapping James in her arms. It's okay, my love. You are so brave, she murmurs into the top of his head, placing kisses between her words. It is not until then that James realizes his cheeks are wet, that he's been crying. I'm okay, he says, though his voice is all over the place when it comes out of his mouth. Thank you, James. Dumbledore places a stopper on the top of the vial before sliding it into the small rack on his desk. Very helpful. Oh, well, his mother says bitterly, as long as he could be helpful to you. Dumbledore doesn't respond to her, and James wonders if she speaks to him like this often, if this is what they're like when they close all those doors in his face. I'll give you two some privacy, Dumbledore says eventually, stepping out from behind his desk, indigo robes fluttering behind him. Feel free to take as long as you need. Euphemia is still holding James. He should probably feel embarrassed by that, but he doesn't. He should probably step away, but he doesn't do that either. He didn't realize how much he needed this until now. I'm okay, he says again, though he doesn't know who he's trying to comfort. I know, baby. She gives him another squeeze before pulling back, enough to hold his face, thumb swiping away the tears he doesn't remember shedding. I love you. You know that? James nods. Yeah, I know. I love you too. Good. She pulls him forward, kissing the top of his head before letting go. They stand still for a minute, James wiping his nose on his sleeve. I don't know if I can forgive him for this, he says finally, voice rough. His mother nods sadly. I know you don't. And I don't know how you can brush it off. I'm not brushing it off, she says firmly. It was horrible what he did, James. I know that. But I also know a broken person when I see them. I can't imagine me shouting at him would have done much. James isn't sure he agrees. Where's Walburga? He asks instead of arguing. His mother looks surprised. Walburga? Why would she be here? She's his mother, James says, though the words taste bitter in his mouth. Euphemia watches him for a moment before nodding slowly. She is, but she's not his guardian. Not since last summer. It isn't surprising. James doesn't know why it hadn't occurred to him before. Oh, he says dumbly. You and Dad... Yes. A beat of silence. How did you do that? His mother lets out a sigh, leaning back against Dumbledore's desk. We asked for custody, and Walburga and Orion gave it to us. Another fact that shouldn't surprise him as much as it does. They just gave him away? Just like that? She grimaces. I'd appreciate it if you didn't put it to Sirius like that, but yes, more or less. I'm not talking to Sirius, he says, because it's the only thing he can think to say. His stomach is squeezing at the idea that anyone could treat their child so casually, like they were disposable. Right, well, when you start to again. You're so certain I will? His voice sounds sharp even to his own ears, but she only smiles softly at him. Yes, I am. And when James only scowls, she goes on. I have watched you two since you were 11 years old, James. You fit together so well, so beautifully. Oh, and when you came back after first year, she smiles more fully now. The looks on your little faces when you had to say goodbye. You cried the whole way home. Do you remember? I was a kid. I cried over loads of dumb stuff, he says defensively. Euphemia shakes her head. Not like this. As soon as we got home, the first thing you did was write to him. Wrote to him every day that summer. James runs a hand through his hair, not appreciating this particular walk down memory lane. We aren't those people anymore. Maybe, she allows, but it wouldn't hurt this bad if you didn't love him. His mother, he firmly believes, is an expert in legitimacy, the way she cuts right through everything, striking at your core. Sometimes, James's voice breaks, but he forces himself to go on. I feel like I'm lying to everyone. Lying about what? She asks softly. He almost laughs. Everything? People look at me like I am supposed to know what I'm doing, and I have no idea. I want to do, the right thing. Most of the time. And I used to be so sure I knew what that was, but now... I If you had asked him a day ago if there was anyone on the planet he trusted more than Sirius Black, he would have answered without hesitating. No, no one. He's the best person I know, the bravest, the strongest. No. If you had asked him a day ago if Sirius would ever use Remus as a prop, to get back at Snape or because of some petty bullshit some guy said to him in a fight, he would have had an answer for you too. No question. And you would have been wrong. Mostly, he goes on, after a long pause, I feel like I'm just treading water, like I'm barely keeping my head above the tide, and I keep waiting to grow up. Everyone wants me to be better, and I want to be that too. I do, so I just wait. I wait for the day that I don't feel like everything is too big. Because somehow life got so big, and I still feel so fucking small. Oh, honey. His mother reaches out, brushing a hand through his hair. The truth is, nobody knows what they're doing. We're all just trying our best. I'm afraid that feeling never really goes away. James lets out a dry laugh. Well, that's depressing. Yeah, a bit, she admits. But it also means you can cut yourself some slack. You're only 15, James. And you're doing wonderfully, considering the circumstances. Pretty sure you have to say that, as my mom. She smiles, pulling him into a hug. I don't, actually. If you were being a little shit, I'd let you know, believe me. James snorts into her shoulder, squeezing her back, trying to soak up as much comfort as he can. Thank you for coming. He doesn't know why he says it, like she wasn't summoned, like she had a choice. Still, he means it. I will always come for you, James, she says, chin resting on top of his head. I promise. When he walks into his dorm room, everything is just as it was when he left. It's not surprising. Nothing happened here. There's no reason for it to be any different. And yet, it feels insulting almost, that it should be so untouched when everything else is unraveling. There are no lights on, the blue of the summer evening, the only thing lighting the space, and so it takes him a minute to realize that, actually, everything is not exactly the same. Sirius's clothes have gone from the floor, the trunk missing from the end of his bed, the records his uncle gave him gone. James stands frozen, staring at the empty holes now suddenly so painfully obvious to him, and feels a wave of mourning crash against his ribs. Oh, you're back. He looks behind him and finds Remus standing in front of the washroom, door closing behind him. James nods. Pete? Great Hall. Shit, is it dinner already? Remus nods, walking slowly forward to stand next to James, both of them at the foot of Sirius's bed. Like a black hole in the center of the room, drawing them in. All James can think is, it was never supposed to be this way, which just drags all his anger back to the surface. Because fuck Sirius. Fuck him for doing this to them. Beside him, Remus lets out a shaky breath, shoving his hands into his pockets. James looks over at him, but Remus keeps his eyes on the bed, even when he starts speaking. He kissed me. Those words are big. They have weight. They take up space. He watches Remus for a few more seconds before moving to sit on the edge of the bed, facing him, listening. He was upset, Remus goes on eventually. You'd been hit by the bludger, you were still in the infirmary, and he was upset, and I was trying to comfort him, and he kissed me. Remus screws up his face, pulling his mouth to the side, and James can tell he's trying not to cry. And I kissed him back. Those words are barely a sound. So quiet and delicate, James worries if he listens too closely, they'll break. I took advantage of him. Remus, he says softly, but his friend shakes his head. I should have stopped it. I should have pushed him away, but His mouth hangs there for a moment, words unable or unwilling to come out. I just wanted him. I've wanted him for so long. James wonders how it is he never noticed it. Not until this year. Not until everything started to fall apart. How could he have been so clueless? So self-involved that he couldn't see what was growing between two of the most important people in his life? He didn't react well, Remus says finally, voice choked. We stopped talking. For a bit. I noticed. Remus nods, still talking more to the bed than to James. But then, things recently, they've been better. He's been so... His voice cuts out again, and it's several moments of silence before he gets it back again. I don't know. Affectionate? James nods. Yeah, I noticed that too. Remus makes a noise, something between a laugh and a sob. Good, I'm glad someone else did. He closes his eyes briefly, worried it was all in my head. It wasn't. He nods slowly, a grimace shooting across his face like he's in pain. Do you think... His voice is thick, eyes still closed. Do you think that's why he did it? It takes a minute for the full meaning of Remus's words to hit him, and when they do, they're a punch to his gut. No, Remus, no way. You didn't see his face after we kissed. You didn't see... He takes in a shaky breath, opening his eyes, wet and shining in the dim light. No one's ever looked at me like that before. A horribly sad laugh comes out of his mouth. And I'm a werewolf. Every word pulls and yanks and drags James down low. Or maybe that was it. Remus's voice is steady, but James can see the tears making their way down his face. Maybe he wasn't upset that he kissed a boy. Maybe he was upset that he kissed a fucking wolf. Stop, James says, begs. Remus, stop. None of this is true. He doesn't think like that. Even as James says it, he can so clearly see Sirius lying on this bed, smiling. We have a fucking werewolf. You sure about that? Remus looks at him properly for the first time, and it aches. Yes, because 2 days ago I told him I was seeing a boy and he hugged me and he said I was his brother. Because I saw the pain in his eyes when you walked away from him at Christmas. Because I saw the way he looked at you yesterday when he thought no one else could see. James leaves too much unsaid, he knows it, but for some reason none of those words can make it out of him. Remus opens his mouth at the same time, and there's rustling at the door. He quickly brings his hands to his face, scrubbing the tears away before he turns back to the bathroom. I'm going to take a shower, he says over his shoulder, the door to the room opening. Remus, but it's too late. He's already disappeared into the other room, shower humming. James sighs, running a hand over his face, turning around expecting to see Peter and instead finding Frank, dragging his trunk with one hand and holding a box of stuff in the other. Oh, James says dumbly, staring at the older boy. Hello to you too. James quickly jumps out of his way as he struggles over, dumping his box of stuff onto Sirius's bed. He huffs, hands on his hips as he looks around. Bit dark in here, isn't it? James smiles grimly, moving to sit on his own bed. Yeah, a bit. Frank flicks his wand, lighting the lamps, eyes trailing over the bed surrounding him. Well, privacy was nice while it lasted. He shoots James a look as he bends over and starts rifling through his stuff. Heads up, Alice will be coming up here from time to time. James snorts, this conversation feeling so out of place after the one he was just having. Just close your curtains, yeah? And use a silencing charm or something. Obviously, we're not barbarians. James barely manages to smile. Sitting there watching Frank unpack, putting his pictures on Sirius's nightstand, his clothes in Sirius's drawers, some childish part of himself wants to throw a fit. No, don't touch that, it shouts. It's not yours. Hey, thanks for doing this, James says eventually, rubbing awkwardly at the back of his neck. Frank sends him a sidelong look as he puts his jumpers neatly in a drawer. Remus will at least get the orderly roommate he's always wanted. I said no at first, he says eventually. Oh yeah? Frank nods. Told McGonagall it was a lost cause, that you'd tear the school apart before you let someone take Black from you. James tries to swallow, but his throat has grown too tight. What changed your mind? He croaks. She told me it was your idea. He pauses in his unpacking, eyes meeting James. That's how I knew. Knew? He nods. That whatever happened, it was serious. They were still for a moment, and James waits for the questions that ought to follow that. The what happened, the what could be so bad, the what did he do, but they don't come. Eventually, Frank goes back to his unpacking. I figured, if something that bad happened, it was probably more important than me having my own room. James has always looked up to Frank. As an only child, he has no older siblings to emulate, to chase after. There was his dad, but that was different. Plus, Fleamont has a tendency to go places James couldn't follow. Then he came to Hogwarts and he met Frank. When they were first years, he was the third year, which at the time felt like a big deal. It felt old. He was one of the youngest members on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, and even then he had been bloody brilliant. James remembers watching him thinking, me, that's going to be me. I'm going to be just like that. On top of that, Frank was just nice. He was always there. If he got lost or forgot the password, he never seemed frustrated or exasperated like some of the other older kids. Even before he became a prefect or head boy, he would go out of his way to help people. He never made a show of it. Frank didn't want attention, never seemed to know what to do with it once he got it. Thanks, James finds himself saying again. Frank looks up from the trousers he'd been folding. He pauses for a moment before finally speaking. Of course. If you need to talk, James, you let me know, yeah? James nods, stomach tightening because he knows that he couldn't, even if he wanted to. Sure. Voice strained, he coughs, trying to clear it away. Sure, yeah, I will. He waits for Remus, but when he doesn't come out of the bathroom after an hour, James takes the hint and goes down to the Great Hall alone. He wonders if this is what it's going to be like from now on, the three of them orbiting around each other, polite but distanced. He wonders if there are things that can't be fixed, if change actually isn't gradual but fast and sharp and violent. He wonders if he should have just let Sirius wipe their memories. When he walks into the come-and-go room, Regulus is sitting on one of the sofas. It hadn't been that long since they saw one another, but it feels like ages, and James's heart does something weird in his chest as he stops by the door, gray eyes holding him still. Listen, Regulus starts with a familiar determination in his voice. He stands up but doesn't come closer, a full room between them. I know you're angry about what happened yesterday. James almost laughs, because, of course, Regulus has no idea what happened yesterday. I know I went too far, I do. He goes on, and for the first time in hours, James feels his body relax. Because he's here, with Reg. Here in their space. Because Regulus's voice is steady and familiar, and he's been craving it all day, desperate to find something to ease the anxiety growing in his stomach. And here it is. Because of course it is. Of course it's him. And Evan and Barty... James blinks, realizing that Regulus has been speaking this whole time. His face is scrunched, serious. They were out of line, way out of line. They're assholes, honestly, but their parents are friends with my mom, so I can't really... It's complicated. It isn't that he's not mad about all of it, about everything that happened in that hallway. It's just that he can't feel it right now. Doesn't have the space for any more anger or betrayal. Maybe it's because he hasn't slept at all, or because everything in his life seems to be falling apart, but all he feels when he looks at Regulus is warmth and home, and it's so nice. After everything that's happened, he just wants to hold on to that. James? Regulus asks, bringing James' drifting mind back to the present. He really does need to get some sleep. I am sorry. He followed me into the corridor, and I swear I tried to walk away, but he wasn't having it. He just kept, I love you. Regulus's mouth abruptly slams shut, eyes growing wide, the room suddenly very quiet. There's a long moment of stillness in which neither of them seems quite able to deal with what James has just thrown into the middle of the room, but eventually, the older boy breaks. I don't want to fight with you. His voice is scratchy when he speaks up again. I'm tired, and I'm having a really shitty day, and I need you. He tries not to wince at the whine in his voice. I just need you. Is that okay? Regulus is staring at him, stock still, gray eyes blinking. Say it again. James laughs roughly. Which part? You know which part. He swallows. He doesn't know why he suddenly feels nervous when he's already said it. I love you, Regulus. It surprises him when Regulus moves, closing the space between them in record time. Suddenly, his mouth is on James's, and he can't hold back the noise that it pulls from him. Needy is the only word that comes to mind. Regulus has his hand on the back of James's neck, bringing him into his level, mouth opening him up, warm and sweet and safe. When James regains control of his body, he wraps his arms around Regulus, pulling him closer until there's no space between their bodies. And still, somehow, it isn't close enough. His hands move down Regulus's back, his sides, slipping under his thighs and lifting him up, Regulus's legs wrapping automatically around his waist. Stupid Jock. Regulus mutters into his mouth, and James laughs. It feels good. It all feels so fucking good, and he's starving for it, for something that doesn't ache, that doesn't feel like treading water. When Regulus's hands are on him, he can breathe. He stumbles toward the bed, spilling Regulus onto his back and holding himself above. The other boy blinks up at him, eyes bright and reaching into him, pulling on his chest, squeezing the air out of his lungs. It isn't new, feeling overwhelmed by this, by him. But James is raw tonight, and all of a sudden looking at Regulus under him is too much, because he wants him. He wants him here, like this, always. Except, didn't last night prove that he can't have that? That you can't keep people? That they're too hard to hold? That everyone slips through your fingers eventually, no matter how much you love them? James? Regulus says softly, reaching up to press his hand to James's face.
Sorry. His voice is ragged. Sorry, I'm a bit of a mess right now. He drops his head, forehead resting against Regulus's. Good to know you're human. James goes to laugh, but it gets trapped in his throat. You want to tell me what happened? Yes, he's whispering, like that'll make it easier. But I can't. Regulus's thumb brushes against his cheek before his hand slowly trails down to James's chest, gently pushing him down onto the bed. They lie facing one another. I'm sorry, James says again, but Regulus just shakes his head. You don't have to apologize to me. He leans forward, pressing a quick kiss to James's mouth. Sweet. Innocent. It makes something in James sing. They just lie there for a minute, James trying to work out what the hell is going on with him, and Regulus just waiting. Eventually, the younger boy reaches out, running his hand through James's hair, and James closes his eyes, leaning into the touch. Sirius, hurt someone. The words are choked when they finally come out of him, because he has to tell someone who isn't directly involved, because it's eating him up inside. Regulus's hand stills. Did he hurt you? Yes, James almost says, because it feels true, but there's an edge in Regulus's voice that gives him a pause. He opens his eyes to look at the boy across from him. Would it matter? Yes, he says without hesitating. I'd kill him. The thing is, James thinks he might be serious. Don't think that helped, but I appreciate the offer. Regulus's eyes narrow. James? No, James says quickly. No, not me, but someone important. He sees Remus's face, standing in their darkened room, the pain is in his eyes. He hears them begging Snape to leave. He hears him screaming. Fuck, James hisses, rolling on his back and bringing his hands up to his face. I don't know what to do. It was bad, Reg. It was so fucking bad. There's stillness. Everything is quiet here, like the rest of the castle doesn't exist. Do you know why he did it? Regulus asks eventually. James lets out a humorless laugh. Merlin, I don't know. He was upset, but all he said to me is that he wasn't thinking. Even saying that out loud makes the anger boil in his blood again. He wasn't thinking, Regulus repeats slowly. And then, all of a sudden, he's sitting up. Reg? James asks, a little startled, propping himself on his elbows. Regulus's legs are crossed, his expression distant. Hey, James reaches out, tugging lightly on his shirt. Sorry, do you not want to talk about... I realize he's your brother and things are... Regulus shakes his head. No, it's fine. And then, listen. I don't know what happened. He runs a hand nervously through his short curls. But he might not mean what you think he does when he says he wasn't thinking. James's brows draw together. I'm going to need you to explain that. He nods, clearly expecting it. You remember how I said that sometimes I have to lock parts of me up? That I can't feel everything? His eyes are focused on some distant point on the bed. Yeah, James says slowly. I remember. Sirius was the one who taught me that trick. James feels his eyebrows raise. Trick? We were, I don't know, 7 and 8? Maybe he was 9, I can't remember. I was bawling my eyes out because our mother had gone on one of her rampages, and he was just... Fine. Regulus shakes his head, an almost rueful look on his face. He was always fine, even though he got the brunt of it. Put himself in her line of fire every time. He never cried. I was so jealous of that when I was a kid. He pauses, James watching him pick at the blanket in front of him, trying not to think about Sirius in Dumbledore's office today, trying to hold back his tears. So he told me, Regulus goes on eventually, he told me that he just took all the things he didn't want to feel or think, that he didn't want our mother to see. To see? James interrupts. Yeah. His voice goes a little wonky. Well, Berga's very good at legitimacy. It's hard to hide things in that house. James can feel the horror on his face. Jesus Christ. Regulus flashes him a grim smile before he goes back to staring at the bed. Yeah. Anyway, you can kind of hide things inside yourself. We used to practice. We got good at it. I don't know if it's proper occlumency or not, but it works. He takes a deep breath. Thing is, when you hide things from yourself, feelings, thoughts, It makes the rest of the world feel kind of far away and, I don't know, pointless. He looks up again and holds James's gaze this time. You can do things you wouldn't do normally. And James has no idea what to do with any of that. The idea of Sirius and Regulus hiding out in Grimold Place teaching themselves how not to feel is heartbreaking, and he wonders, not for the first time, how either of them survived it. I'm not saying that to excuse whatever it is that he did, Regulus goes on, but when he says he wasn't thinking, it means more coming from him. That's all. He smiles weakly. He's the best of us, really. Even when he was a kid, always stood up to her, and they made him pay for it. He chews on his bottom lip. They're still making him pay for it. James feels his eyes go wide. Do you think Sirius is right about your uncle, that they had him killed for reaching out to him? Regulus shrugs. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. You don't just get to walk away from the House of Black. That's not how it works. It's all too much. How do people handle these things? What are you supposed to do? Because James has no fucking idea. He pulls himself up to sit properly, bending his knees on the mattress and hanging his head for a minute. He doesn't want to talk about Sirius anymore. He can't. It's too confusing. It hurts too much. Do you still have to do it? He asks instead. Do what? James looks up, Regulus's eyes on him. Every time, he thinks, every bloody time he finds that stare, his insides catch on fire. Hide things from yourself? Regulus looks at him for a long time. Yeah, he says eventually. I had to hide you. Me? Regulus nods and then looks away. James can see him chewing on the inside of his cheek. It's part of the reason I was such a wreck when I came back. He laughs sadly. You take up so much space in me that when I had to feel it again, it was too much. So much more than it had ever been before. I couldn't bear it. Well, you saw. James watches him, eyes running over the ends of his hair, the tip of his nose, the way his lips quirk. He tries to breathe through everything going on inside of him, tries to hold it all. He reaches out, makes sure Regulus can see, makes sure he goes slow enough that he can pull away. Come here, he says roughly, linking their fingers together and giving Regulus a light tug. He comes in, the pair of them falling back into the bed, Regulus in James's arms, face burrowing in his neck. Je t'aime, Regulus whispers, kissing behind his ear. Je t'aime, je t'aime, je t'aime. Every word is punctuated with a kiss, quick and sweet, under his jaw, along his neck, Regulus's breath warm against his skin. James's eyes flutter closed. English, the word punches out of him. Just once. Say it in English once. Regulus stills, but doesn't pull away, lips still brushing against James in an accidental way that sends shivers down his spine. Eventually, Regulus props himself up on his elbows, looking at James like he's the only thing in the world, and James can barely stand it. Regulus leans down and brings their mouths together, slow and purposeful, ripping a gasp out of James when he pulls away. I love you, Regulus says, stare determined even as his voice shakes. I'm sorry. James doesn't understand that, doesn't know how to make sense of it over the blood rushing in his ears, the heart beating in his chest. Don't apologize. He lifts himself up to Regulus's mouth. Don't ever apologize for loving me. Chapter notes. Hello, lovelies. Remus is heartbroken, and James has basically divorced Sirius, but Regulus said I love you, so it all evens out in the end, right? Honestly, I always find the fallout from the prank so stressful because I, like Euphemia Potter, am a firm believer that James and Sirius belong together, platonically, but also they're soulmates. Thank you for your wonderful comments. Always appreciate it. Chapter 15. Chapter summary. Guys, gals, and non-binary pals, I give you Remus John Lupin. Personally, I'm very excited for this one. When Remus Lupin was 5 years old, a monster broke into his bedroom and bit him. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Some story made up to scare little kids. Remus isn't sure he would believe it himself if it hadn't happened to him. But it's there, on his side, between his ribs and his hips, the unmistakable imprint of teeth. The skin white and puckered, the ugliest, he thinks, of all of his scars.
I don't think they're ugly, Sirius had said to him once, 3rd year. I think they're beautiful. The infuriating thing about Sirius Black, well, one of many, is that he can just say things like that. Without thinking, without caring. Everything about Sirius is careless. His hair, his flying, his words. Sirius acts like nothing matters. It should be annoying, obnoxious, but really, it's addictive. Remus feels like he can never get enough of it, like he's hungry for him all the time. He worries that it isn't hormones, that it's the wolf, that one day he'll lose control and eat Sirius whole. When Remus Lupin was 5 years old, a monster broke into his bedroom and bit him. It was his father's fault. His father, who hates werewolves, who wanted them dead, ended up with one for a son. Talk about family dysfunction. Sometimes Remus wishes it had happened later, that he could have had more time with his parents before all they saw when they looked at him was tragedy. He expects it would be easier to be angry with them. But he isn't. Mostly he just hurts for them. They're good people. They probably would have been good parents, if things had been different. He knows that they tried for a while to have another kid. He supposes that's another thing to be angry about. But he just thinks it's too bad it didn't work out. They deserved a do-over. When Remus Lupin was 5 years old, a monster broke into his bedroom and bit him. It was the worst pain he had ever felt in his life. That is, until he transformed for the first time. Locked in the cellar, no windows, no light, stone floors and stone walls. His father had revarnished the door with wolfsbane. Every time Remus touches it, his skin burns, even when he isn't a wolf. It's a trick his father's used a few more times. On his office, the bedroom. Precautions, in case Remus gets out on some full moon, in case he comes for them in the night. Most children ask their parents to check for monsters under their beds, or in their closets, but thanks to Fenrir Greyback, Lyle and Hope Lupin had never had to check. The monster had come and gone, and Remus never thought it likely any others would visit, because he wasn't a little boy anymore. Not really. Not after that. He was a wolf, just as scary as anything else that goes bump in the night. Okay, Lily says as she drops abruptly into the seat across from him, making Remus jump. The books that had been in her hands fan out in front of her. What is going on? He looks at her for a moment before returning his attention to the book in front of him. He's finished all his homework. Now he's just revising for his owls. Again. Hello to you too, he says without lifting his eyes. Remus, Lily. He can practically hear the frown in her voice. Sirius is off the Quidditch team. Frank is living in your dorm, and the 4 of you are avoiding one another like it's the bloody plague. We are not, Remus says, feeling particularly defensive about that last point, because the truth is, he has been avoiding James and Peter, but he hates that he's doing it, and hates even more that people have noticed, especially Lily. You are. I tried to ignore it, but I can't bear it anymore. What happened? Remus bites down on his lower lip, staring intently at the words he's no longer reading. Honestly, Lily is so pushy she could give Sirius a run for his money. Remus, she says exasperated, before she yanks the book right out from under him. Oi! He tries to snatch it back, but he's too slow. An aggressive shh noise comes from the table next to them. I was reading that, Remus whisper shouts, and I swear if you get me banned from the library, I will never forgive you. Lily does not look particularly concerned by either of these statements. She promptly folds down the corner of Remus's page, like an animal, before closing the book on the table and resting her hands on top of it. Remus, she whispers back, you've been sulking for weeks. I have not been sulking. He crosses his arms over his chest and then, realizing how little that helps, quickly uncrosses them. Lily arches a disbelieving eyebrow. You have. You all have. He wishes she would stop bringing James and Peter into this. He feels bad enough about them already. He doesn't need her reminding him what a shit friend he's been, or how it's all his fault that any of this happened in the first place. Yes, obviously Sirius is the biggest asshole on the planet, but if Remus if he had just been someone else, then none of it would have happened. James put on a brave face, but Remus can see how much it kills him, not talking to Sirius. Part of him wants to tell James it's okay, that he can forgive him if he wants, but the truth is, Remus is too selfish. Because if there's a choice between Remus and Sirius, Remus knows who James will pick. And he just can't bear the thought of losing James. At least, not yet.
Hey, Lily reaches forward, tapping the back of his hand lightly. Where'd you go? Remus shakes his head, trying to get his thoughts straight. Sorry. Lily looks genuinely concerned now. It's bad, huh? Remus almost laughs, running a hand over his face. Yeah, he says finally. Yeah, it's bad. Her eyes are green and very intent on looking directly at him. Remus does his best not to squirm, but he's not sure he manages it. He's never gotten comfortable with being looked at. His parents spent so much of his life looking at the floor, the ceiling, or some spot over his shoulder that coming to Hogwarts and having people stare right at him has never felt natural. Come on, Lily says suddenly, scooping up their books in her arms and getting to her feet. Remus blinks. What are you doing? We are going for a walk. She nods her head over his shoulder toward the door. Come on, let's go. Remus considers fighting her, but something in her eyes tells him that it would be a lost cause, so, reluctantly, he gets to his feet, grabbing his bag off the back of his chair. I hope you know that I'm only letting you boss me around because I like you. She beams in a way that's so reminiscent of Sirius, it makes his heart hurt. And that right there is why we're friends, she says as she hands him back his book, and they start making their way to the exit. Because I like you? Because you liking me leads you to doing what I say. Remus snorts. Oh, right, of course. And then, also because you know I'm the only one who actually takes notes in Bin's class. Remus, she gasps with mock indignation. I would never use you for your history of magic notes. Besides, it's a fair trade, since I'm loads better at potions than you are. Too good. Now I have to deal with Slughorn coming after me about his bloody dinner parties and Sirius and James coming after me for actually considering going. Marilyn, those two are a nightmare, aren't they? She says as she steers him toward the courtyard. Remus shrugs noncommittally, ignoring the tightening in his chest. He can feel Lily giving him a look out of the corner of her eye. You should come, you know, she says eventually. Remus arches his brow. This slug club? Nah, I don't think so. Not for me, really. Not for you, or not for James and Sirius? Remus stops abruptly. So abruptly, in fact, that Lily's a few steps ahead before she realizes, turning back to him with a questioning look. If this is going to be a James Potter bashing fest, I'm really not interested, okay? Lily's eyes go wide. No, Sorry, she sighs, tucking her hair behind her ear. Sorry, she repeats. Old habits die hard. I mean, they seem like the type of thing you might like if you let yourself. Remus looks at her skeptically, but starts walking again, the pair of them pushing through the doors to the outside. The spring evening warm and sweet, the sky pink as the sun dips below the horizon. I went to one, if you remember. She nods, clearly trying to hide a smile. I do. I remember you talking to absolutely no one and then leaving early. Well, everyone there was a social climbing prat. He shoots her a quick look. No offense. She laughs. None taken. They pull up to one of the benches and Lily collapses, dropping her book bag with a dramatic sigh. Well, if you're not going to make new friends, you're going to have to stop avoiding the ones you already have. Remus's mouth forms a flat line. I'm not avoiding them, he repeats for the 100th time. Lily sends him a skeptical look. Yesterday, I watched you make a U-turn in the middle of the hallway when you saw Sirius walking toward you. Remus had hoped he'd managed to be a bit more subtle than that. Well, okay, he mutters, eventually picking at some lint on his pants. Him I am avoiding. Sirius? Why? Why? There's so many reasons, really. Or maybe just one. He's never sure with Sirius, never sure of where they stand or how he feels or what he wants. He's memorized all the moments that they've touched. He has a list in his head that he pulls up on his bad days. Halloween, second year, when Sirius threw his arm around Remus's shoulders, or on his birthday and fourth, when Sirius got tipsy for the first time and kissed his cheek, or a few weeks ago, the last time, when he laid in bed and Sirius caressed his cheek. Maybe those are the reasons he's avoiding Sirius. Because if they didn't exist, maybe it wouldn't hurt so much that Sirius had told Snape. If he didn't have lists of Sirius Black in his head, maybe he could just brush it off. So what if he only saw Remus as a pet? He'd been worse things. Hello? Lily waves her hands in front of his face, snapping him back to the present. You still with me? Yeah, sorry, my mind kind of... He doesn't know how to finish that sentence. Did he do something to you, specifically? Lily asks, when Remus can't seem to summon any more words. I guess that makes sense. It would have to be something like that to get Potter to stop talking to him. Remus sighs, pinching the bridge of his nose. Potter, Lily? Really? Are we back to that? Now it's her turn to get defensive. You said you didn't want this to be a James Potter bashing fest. I don't. Then I suggest we change the subject. Remus rolls his eyes. You can't avoid him forever. First of all, yes, I absolutely can. And second, pot, meet kettle. I'm not avoiding James. Oh my God, Remus, we're talking in circles. You are. You know it, and I know it, so let's get over the denial bit, shall we? Remus scowls. Well, I have a valid reason. Brilliant. So do I. Not hardly. Excuse me? Lily waves her hand in the direction of the lawn. Remus rolls his eyes. That was not an exile-worthy offense. I don't think the silent treatment can be reasonably considered exile. But Remus doesn't take it back, crossing his arms over his chest and sending her a pointed look. Lily holds his gaze for a second or two before throwing her arms up in exasperation. I don't know what you want me to say. I thought he'd grown out of being a jerk. Clearly he hasn't. And honestly, I don't have the energy to deal with it. You don't think you could cut him a little slack here? Remus asks. There were extenuating circumstances. There were extenuating circumstances for everyone. You didn't see the rest of us trying to undress someone in front of the whole school? Or shouting out slurs, Remus counters, causing a dark look to pass over her face. Yeah, well, I'm not speaking to him either. Silence falls around them, and Remus can't hold Lily's stare any longer. He looks to the sky, eyeing it warily. A month really isn't a very long time, and the full moon is coming up again. The full moon where Snape will know, where Sirius won't be there. I'm just saying, Remus breaks eventually. It would be a shame if you two went back to how you were. He looks over at Lily. You were good together. She makes a noise somewhere between a cough and a gag, and Remus rolls his eyes. That's not what I meant. You're both just so bright, you know? Watching you go head to head when you're having fun is brilliant. Fun? Lily repeats, brow raised. Oh, fine. Pretend like you don't know what I mean, but I know you do. She shakes her head, slipping down in her seat and resting her head on the back of the bench. I like him more than I thought I would, she confesses eventually, and Remus thinks he feels himself genuinely smile for the first time in a while. Oh, yeah? She turns her head, a sharp look in her eyes. But don't you dare tell him I said that. I'm still mad at him. Besides, his head doesn't need to get any bigger. It's really not that big. It's just his hair. Lily lets out a surprised huff of laughter. That was a terrible joke. Remus shrugs. Sorry, best I got. But I won't tell him. He leans a little closer, mock whispering. I'm avoiding him, remember? Ah, she nods. But not for the same reason you're avoiding Sirius. No, or yes, I don't know. He sits back, running a frustrated hand through his hair. It's complicated. He can feel Lily eyeing him and can't decide if she's waiting for more information or if she just can't find anything better to look at. Part of him wants to tell her, to let it all out. It's exhausting. The lies. Where does he go every month? What are all his scars from? Why is he always getting sick? His schoolmates don't really ask anymore. Not because they're satisfied with the stories he tells, but because they're tired of hearing them, of never getting a straight answer out of him. He looks over when he hears Lily start rummaging through her bag. I swear I threw them in here, she mutters to himself. Come on, you. Ah. She pulls herself back up, a small silver box in her hand. She slides the lid open to reveal a neat roll of cigarettes. Remus arches his brow as she places one between her lips before offering him the box. Lily Evans, I never. He laughs as he takes one for himself. Is this really respectable behavior for a Gryffindor prefect? You tell me, she says, words slightly muffled as she gestures him forward until the ends of their cigarettes are almost touching. He expects her to pull out a lighter, but instead she brings her fingers up and snaps. She makes a pleased trilling noise and they both go light, pulling back to inhale. Never done two at the same time before, she says proudly. Remus is still feeling rather stunned by the whole thing. You ever shown James that trick? He asks eventually. The smoke is dry and scratchy in his lungs. It's not that he's ever smoked before, only that he hasn't done much of it. The last time he tried, he basically coughed up the entire contents of his chest. I have not. Remus nods. Probably a good idea to keep it that way. I think he'd combust. Cool, isn't it? Lily snorts. Mary taught me last summer. Ah, Mary. Of course, I should have guessed. The cigarette doesn't feel natural between his fingers. Not the way it looks between Lily's. He feels like a kid playing at being grown up. A few minutes passed. Lily blowing elegant grape clouds into the sky. Remus trying to stop himself from choking. My dad used to smoke, Lily says eventually. The smell, I don't know, makes me feel better. Calm. Thought it might help. Remus doesn't know much about Lily's dad, apart from the fact that he died when she was in second year. He remembers that morning, the pale look on her face, the way she had walked away from the table and not come back to class all day. Were you close? He finds himself asking. She smiles a little, looking up at the sky. Sure, I mean, I wasn't telling him my deepest, darkest secrets or anything, but she closes her eyes for a minute, inhaling deeply. He used to make me laugh, The smoke slips between her lips. He'd do anything for a good joke. And he used to build things. Turned our garage into a workshop, make wooden swords and little thrones for me and my sister. I loved that place. She sighs. Now it just has a car in it. Remus watches her for a minute, the evening growing dimmer. I'm sorry, he says eventually. She looks over at him. I'm sorry about Sirius. Not quite sure it's the same as your dad dying. He offers a weak smile, but she doesn't return it. Doesn't mean it isn't still painful. You reckon you'll be able to get past it? Remus grimaces, looking down at the cigarette in his hand and flicking the ash off just for something to do. I don't know. Not sure I know how. He inhales too quickly, suddenly spluttering and coughing, leaning forward as his eyes water. Whoa, breathe, cowboy. Lily pats him on the back, laughing. Sorry, Remus's voice comes out scratchy. Not much of a smoker. I can see that, she smiles. I'm surprised. I would have thought James and Sirius would be all over it. Fits so nicely with their bad boy images. Remus half chokes and half laughs. I don't know. Do wizards even smoke cigarettes? I've seen some old ones with pipes, but I've never walked into a shop in Diagon Alley and seen a pack of cigarettes for sale. Lily arches her brow. I mean, you would know better than me. What? He asks, momentarily confused as he wipes the last of his tears from his eyes. Why? She sends him a bemused look before pointing at herself. Muggle-born? He blinks a few times. Oh, well, I'm not much better. When her brows draw together, he explains. Grew up in the country, not really around anyone else. My dad, he's the wizard of the family. He's always been pretty busy with work. With avoiding his werewolf son, but Remus figures that level of candor is unnecessary. So it was my mom who was around mostly, and her mom, my granny, a few cousins that would come visit from time to time. All Muggle. Barely saw magic before I came to Hogwarts. Huh, Lily says thoughtfully, rolling the cigarette between her fingers. I always figured if you were magic, you'd use it all the time. I think some people probably do. I will, she shoots him a grin. God, the minute I'm allowed to use magic, I'll use it for everything. Remus laughs. Everything? She nods. Everything. Cooking? Ha, magic. Need something from the next room? Please, I'll accio all day. Never move. I'll never flick another light switch, never pick up another dustpan. I'll apparate everywhere I go. Who needs to walk? Well, it's good to know you'll be putting all your powers to good use, Remus says dryly. She only grins wider. It'll be brilliant. I can't wait to have a house full of magic. Plants and potions and moving portraits. Remus nods. Though he does his best not to think about the future. He's not sure what it holds for him, but he can't imagine it's anything good. Not a lot of opportunities out there for werewolves, and it won't take long for any wizard with half a brain to sniff him out. Hey. He looks over as Lily pulls slightly on his shirt. It's going to be okay, you know, she says, even though she can't possibly have any idea what he's thinking. He wonders what it is she sees on his face. Yeah, he manages after a moment, dropping the cigarette from his hand and crushing it under his heel. Sure, Lily. He doesn't know when he fell in love with Sirius Black. It might have been the first time he saw him, stampeding into their dorm room with James behind him, so big and loud and full of life in a way that Remus craved. It might have been the first time Sirius smiled at him, not just around him, but at him, because of him. Or one of the late nights when Pete and James had fallen asleep and Sirius and Remus had stayed up, sitting in the window, talking, legs tangled in each other. He misses being able to touch like that, casually, naturally. He knows that he always liked it, that he always kept lists of those moments. But he hadn't really thought much about why, about what it meant. Not until last year, when he started having to watch Sirius touch other people, when he would stay up late by himself because Sirius wasn't back yet. Sometimes he would check the map. He wasn't proud of it, felt like an invasion of Sirius's privacy, and it certainly wasn't good for Remus, but he couldn't help it. He would check, and then inevitably find him in some broom cupboard or the astronomy tower, his name too close to someone else's. He did cry about it. Once, maybe twice. Pathetic. You can always feel Sirius. He takes up space in every room he enters, drawing you to him without even saying a word. He's magnetic, and Remus has always been powerless against it. So really, it's impressive when he stops at the end of the hall, feet away from the portrait to the Gryffindor common room. Impressive that he doesn't go rushing right to the lithe figure leaning against the wall. It's been weeks since he's been properly near Sirius, and he can feel the pull in his chest, the hunger in his stomach. Sirius's eyes meet his. Moons? I don't think we're on nickname terms right now. Remus cuts him off. Sirius nods, turning to face Remus properly, but not attempting to close the gap between them. For a moment, they just stand there, staring at one another. I've been waiting for you, Sirius says finally, looking hopelessly awkward. Okay. Listen, can we talk? We are talking. Sirius makes a frustrated noise at the back of his throat that Remus thinks is entirely unwarranted. I've given you time, okay? How generous of you, Remus says coldly, feeling his anger slowly overshadowing everything else going on inside him, which is good. Anger is the easiest thing to feel. I just mean, Sirius swipes a hand over his face. I just mean I want you to talk to me. Please, just give me this chance. No, Remus's brain answers automatically. No, we can't talk. You don't get chances. Not after everything you've done, you selfish, manipulative, lying piece of... Talk then, says Remus's traitorous mouth. Sirius looks surprised. What? You want to talk? Go for it. I'm waiting. Maybe we should go somewhere, I don't know, a little more... He looks around, a pair of first years walking up behind him toward the portrait, another group of students laughing further down the hall. Private? Where? Remus demands. Sirius's hand rubs the back of his neck nervously. Frank's, my room, we could... Remus laughs. I am not going back to your room with you. Sirius wrinkles his nose. You don't have to make it sound so sinister. Everything with you sounds sinister now. Sirius stiffens for a minute, staring back at him with those ridiculous eyes and that ridiculous mouth. Remus has never hated someone so much, never missed someone, never wanted to sink his teeth in so deep. Fine, Sirius says eventually, walking toward Remus but not stopping at him. Come on. Where are you going? And it's a habit that has Remus following after him before he gets an answer. Like a fucking dog. He grits his teeth but doesn't turn back. You don't want to come back to my room? Fine, Sirius mutters as they turn the next corner, walking unnecessarily fast. He stops at an unassuming door, swinging it open and gesturing for Remus to enter. It takes him a minute to realize what he's looking at. Oh, you would know where all the broom cupboards are. Remus snarks as he walks inside. Not all, Sirius corrects unhelpfully, just the ones close to the common room. Remus isn't sure if Sirius means for that to sting, but it does, his heart giving an inconvenient tug as Sirius closes the door behind them and mutters a silencing charm. And then, nothing. They just stand there, Sirius suddenly looking much less confident. Well, Remus demands eventually, say something or stop wasting my fucking time. Sirius flinches. Right. He exhales, looking up through his eyelashes. Remus. And Remus hates it. Hates the way he says his name. Like it hurts. Like it matters. Hates that it makes him want to cry. That's all you got? He croaks. When the truth is, from Sirius, it's almost enough. So much of Remus just wants to forgive him. Just wants to have him back. No. Sirius laughs without humor. No, listen, I didn't want to hurt you. I've never wanted to hurt you. Sirius is speaking quickly, hands held out pleadingly in front of him, like forgiveness is something Remus can just give to him. Here you go. Make sure to keep that somewhere safe now. I know that I did, Sirius goes on. And I know, and I hate that. You have no idea, but He swallows with difficulty. I meant what I said at Christmas. You're important to me. Remus snorts, even though he feels like each one of his bones is cracking apart. Just not as much as you cared about getting back as Snape, though, right? Or Rosier? Or was it Regulus you were trying to hurt? It's not really clear to me. He can see Sirius shrinking back from his words, taking each one like a blow to the face. What is clear, he pushes on, is that you didn't think about me at all. Not for a single second. That whoever else was involved in this, I never entered the equation. Not for you. Remus, Sirius tries desperately, but these words have been building up in Remus for weeks, and he wants them out. He's tired of having them rot inside him. Did you forget that there was a person inside that wolf? He asks. Or is that all you see when you look at me? Some fucking circus act or something. An animal taught to walk on its hind legs. You can't think that. Sirius's eyes go wide. You can't, Remus. What else am I supposed to think? Fighting the sob he can already feel building in his chest. You're worse than Snape, you know that? At least I know where I stand with him. At least I know what he thinks of me. You had the fucking audacity to make me believe that maybe... But he cuts himself off, unwilling to let that pathetic truth go. He can't stand it anymore. Looking at Sirius, feeling him, smelling him, he turns around, pressing his palms flat against the cold wall behind him and trying to breathe. The silence comes back, wraps itself around them, carving holes in their armor. There never used to be silences between them. Not before this year. Not before the kiss. He used to be able to talk to Sirius for hours. Remus quickly closes his eyes against the burn. He hears Sirius exhale. I know that I fucked up. I have no idea how to make it right. His voice breaks, falls away, cracks as it hits the ground. Sirius growls in frustration and starts again. You don't have to forgive me. I don't deserve it. I understand that, really. I do. I just want you to know. I just need you to understand that you are so beautiful. Every inch of you, every part of you, you're the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I'm so fucking sorry. His voice is thick. It carries his words like they hurt to hold. If I made you feel, even for a second, like you aren't. Remus cries then, and he hates it. Hates that he isn't stronger than this. Hates Sirius for existing, for being all that he is, for burrowing so deeply into Remus's bones, for breaking his heart. With those girls, with that kiss, with Snape. He feels sore and raw and bleeding. He presses his forehead against the wall, unwilling to turn around, everything coming out of him in choked gasps, like there isn't enough air. Fuck, Remus, please. He hears Sirius step forward, and he wants to tell him to stay the fuck away, because hasn't he done enough? Did he think Remus needed this? Needed someone else to take him apart? But he can't speak. He tries, but all that comes out is some pitiful gasping noise, his shoulders shaking as he tries desperately to shove the sobs back down. Sirius comes up behind him, arms wrapping around him, pulling Remus into his chest. I hate you, Remus thinks. I hate you. I hate you. I'm sorry. Sirius's voice is by his ear. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And then, somehow, Sirius's breath isn't the only thing brushing against Remus's skin. I'm sorry. He kisses his cheek, messy and desperate. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. His neck, his jaw. Please. Please. I'm sorry. It's sad. It all feels so fucking sad and warped. I'm sorry. Sirius kisses the tears off his face. I'm sorry. It's the first time he's kissed him since James was hurt, and it curdles his stomach. Enough. Remus pushes him off, hands shaking as he turns around to face him, back pressing against the wall. Sirius is a wreck, all pale-faced and red-eyed. You don't get to do that, Remus says, as steadily as he can manage. Not now. Not like this. Not just because you want me to forgive you. Sirius shakes his head. No, that isn't... I don't know why I did that. And the fear in his voice is what makes Remus believe him, which feels worse, if he's being honest. I don't know why I did that, he repeats to himself. Remus almost laughs, running a hand over his face, finding himself wishing for days when the hardest thing about this was Sirius's denial. Brilliant, he bites out, maybe more harshly than he should. He isn't sure anymore. Doesn't know what either of them deserves. Great talk. You can go now. Remus, do you have anything else to say? He's barely getting the words out, desperately trying to drag his anger back to the surface to block out the rest of it. Because if not, you can go. He sees the flare of irritation in Sirius's eyes. And what? You're just going to hide out in the broom cupboard? Why? Remus growls. Do you need it for something? He sees that hit land, and it's not as satisfying as it ought to be. There isn't... Sirius grimaces, clearly frustrated, though whether it's with himself or with Remus doesn't know. There isn't anyone right now. His words are broken pieces. I don't care, Remus lies. He knows that Sirius can tell. He's grateful when he doesn't push it. You don't need to stay here. I'll wait if you just don't want to be stuck walking back together or whatever. What I want, he almost says, is for you not to argue with me for once in our lives. I want to not look like I've been crying when I walk through the common room, he says instead. You're the asshole. You get to walk out there looking like a mess. Sirius gives him a quick once-over, and really, Remus must look terrible because Sirius doesn't bother arguing after that. Right, he says, nodding, eyes on the ground. Contrition doesn't suit him. Yeah, okay. And Remus should let him go. It's what he wants, to be left alone. And yet, for some inexplicable reason, when he sees Sirius's hand on the door, he hears himself say, I told James. Sirius freezes, a brief pause before he turns back to look at Remus. Told him? He asks cautiously. Remus nods. About that you kissed me. He isn't sure what kind of reaction he's expecting from Sirius, but in the end he doesn't get much. A stiff nod, Sirius's teeth slipping over his bottom lip. He took that well, I expect? Remus doesn't know if that's sarcasm or not. He already knew, I think. Or he had some idea that something was going on. He didn't seem surprised, just listened. You know how he is. Remus clamps his mouth shut, trying to put an end to the word vomit now pouring out of him. I know how he is, Sirius repeats quietly, before letting out a dry laugh. Be hypocritical for him to have an issue with it. Remus feels his brow furrow. What do you mean? You know how he's been sneaking out at night? Sirius asks. Yeah? Sirius doesn't say anything. He just arches his brow and waits for Remus to catch up. Under different circumstances, it probably wouldn't have taken him so long. Oh, he says when it finally hits him. Really? Sirius gives him a weak smile. Yeah, took me a bit by surprise too after... Lily, Remus finishes for him, a dozen assumptions and moments reconfiguring themselves in his head. Yeah. Sirius's voice is rough. Look, don't go saying anything, all right? The bloke, whoever it is, doesn't want anyone to know. I reckon James wasn't really meant to say anything to me, so... Not great at keeping people's secrets, are you? It's a cheap shot. It slips out of Remus before he can think better of it. He watches Sirius absorb the hit, watches him fight his natural urge to push back. Yeah, he says eventually, voice gravel. Well... He turns back to the door but pauses again, clearing his throat without turning around. If you figure out what you need me to do to make this right, to fix this, let me know, okay? He breathes in. I'll do anything for you, Remus. Those words hit Remus like a blow to the head, Sirius pushing out into the corridor before he has the chance to recover. He can't sleep. He hasn't been able to since the full moon. 5 years he slept with Sirius next to him, and now that he's gone, the room isn't right. Frank doesn't breathe right or snore right or move right. Everything he does sets off alarm bells in Remus's head, screaming wrong, wrong, wrong. Remus lies in his bed, staring up the canopy over his head, mind thrumming with thoughts and memories. When they were 11, Sirius found the books Remus's mom had bought him. What are these? He'd snatched one off of Remus's bedside table before collapsing next to him on the mattress. That's a book? You read it. A foreign concept to you, I know. Sirius swatted at him. Prick. But Remus had only laughed, watching Sirius roll on his back and hold the book over his face. No, really, he'd said after a few minutes. What is this? It's a book. Sirius screwed up his face, wrinkling his nose and sticking out his tongue, and Remus couldn't stop himself from laughing again. It doesn't look right. Well, Remus had tried to get himself under control. It's Muggle. Maybe that's why? No way! Sirius promptly flipped onto his stomach, legs dangling off the side of the bed. Wicked! What's it about? Remus watched Sirius slipping enthusiastically through the pages with a fondness he wouldn't understand for several years to come. Lots of things, really. Friendship, adventure, magic. Sirius's head shot up at that. Magic? Muggles have books about magic? What the heck? Does the minister know about this? Remus rolled his eyes. Well, it's not our magic. Our magic? They don't know that magic is real, so they make up what they think magic would be like if it was. Sirius continued to stare at him for a moment, and Remus was sure he'd lost him, but then he smiled. Wicked, he repeated, turning back to the book. Remus had watched him for a minute, mouth feeling oddly dry. You can, borrow it, if you want? Sirius's eyes flicked back to him. Yeah? Yeah, Remus nodded, probably too enthusiastically. Of course. Thanks. He'd smiled again, and Remus had smiled back. feeling an odd bit of pride at having been able to give Sirius something. He'd always felt like he was lagging behind in those first few years. And for once, he'd known something Sirius hadn't. Had something Sirius wanted. He'd often wondered since then what he would do to Sirius's bad boy reputation if people knew he was a nerd for Muggle fantasy books. Remus never said anything to anyone, though. Not even James or Peter. The books were their thing. His and Sirius's. He had liked that. Groaning, Remus curls into his side, willing his brain to shut up and leave him alone and let him sleep. Shockingly, this does not prove to be a particularly effective strategy. He flips back onto his back, running his hands over his face a few times before peeking his head out of his bed curtains. He can hear Frank's out-of-place breathing and Peter's snoring and James's predictable absence. Carefully, he slides out of the bed, padding toward James's bedside table and opening the drawer. It had been a long time since he looked for Sirius on the map. He doesn't want to start again. Doesn't want to need to. But he still pulls out the faded parchment, sitting down on James's empty bed, wand in hand. He spends a good 5 minutes like that, just staring at it, trying desperately to convince himself just to put it away and go back to sleep. This isn't going to help. But, of course, he doesn't. The map unfolds in his lap. He's not sure what he's expecting, but there's Sirius, alone in Frank's old room, apparently not able to sleep either because according to the map, he's pacing. Remus watches him, feeling something deep inside him ache. "You know," he whispers the little name. "For a minute there, I really thought you saw me." It's all very anticlimactic and predictably does nothing to make him feel better. He sighs, about to put the map away when suddenly an appearance of 2 other names catches his attention. James Potter, Regulus Black, standing together somewhere on the 7th floor in the middle of the night. Remus blinks several times before rubbing his eyes, but even when they refocus, the names remain the same, and incredibly close together. Then, Regulus starts walking toward the Slytherin common room, James waiting until he disappears around the corner before heading to Gryffindor Tower. There's probably a very valid reason for them being together, and Remus tries to reassure himself, like they just ran into each other by coincidence at 3 a.m. Stranger things have happened. Except Sirius said... interjects the troublesome voice in his head, but no. Remus shuts that right down because there's no way. So that James is seeing a... Yeah, sure, but that doesn't mean that just because Regulus is a bloke James is meeting in the dead of night, at the same time he confessed to Sirius he was spending time with his... What? Hookup? Boyfriend? Jesus, is Regulus Black his boyfriend? No, that's ridiculous. James isn't that stupid. He can't be. James, the boy who can't stand anyone who even entertains the idea of dark magic, who's been running around since he was 11 trying to rid the world of evildoers, that James Potter would never get involved with Regulus Black. It isn't possible. Remus hears someone on the stairs and quickly taps the map blank, shoving it back in the drawer with a little more force than he ought to, considering there's 2 sleeping people in the room. He's only just closed the curtains around his own bed when the door quietly opens, James slipping in as he does most nights. For some reason, Remus's pulse is jackhammering in his chest. He spent months trying to get Sirius to leave it alone, to let James come clean when he was ready, talking him down time and time again from following James through the castle, and now he thinks maybe that was a mistake. Because if he really is seeing Regulus, then someone should have stopped this. He hears James get into his bed and resists the urge to go over there right now and demand answers. Demand how he could be so fucking stupid. But he can't. Not with Frank. Hell, not even with Peter. Forget the fact that Regulus is, at best, an unpleasant person. If Sirius ever finds out, he'll kill him. And not metaphorically. Remus barely represses a groan as he shoves his face into his pillow. As if his own love life wasn't messy enough. He watches James the next morning, looking for some sort of sign. A convenient Regulus was here, scribbled across the back of his neck or something. Honestly, it's so ludicrous, he keeps wondering if he didn't just make it up. Misread the names. Hallucinate for a few minutes. "All right, Mooney?" James asks, standing by the door, double-checking his books. "Are you snogging Regulus Black?" He nearly bursts out, but luckily, despite his lack of sleep, he still has some self-control. "You do look a bit peaky, Moons." Peter looks at him, head slightly tilted, concern written across his face. Why Moons?" Frank asks as he comes out of the washroom, filling the room with the smell of a distinctly new aftershave. It isn't that bad. Nothing about Frank is bad. Just wrong. "Huh?" James asks, tearing his eyes away from Remus. The nickname. You call him Moon or whatever? Frank hoists his book bag over his shoulder. Where'd it come from? We've never called him Moon, Peter says, in such a matter-of-fact tone that Remus almost laughs. I just heard... Pete's right. We've never called him Moon. No idea what you're on about, Frank. You know what I mean, the older boy says, sounding slightly exasperated. He really doesn't have the stamina to handle them. James nudges Pete with his elbow. You know what he means? Peter shrugs his head. Not a clue. You literally just... It's not like it's a secret. You walk around calling each other nonsense and literally in front of everyone. Frank's eyes go back and forth between their blank faces before shaking his head. You know what? Forget it. It's too early for this. James laughs as they all start moving toward the door. He shoots Remus a look, concern flickering back over his face. Moons? Sorry, yeah, coming. I bloody heard that, comes Frank's voice from down the stairs. He could just let it go. Should just let it go. It's not like he doesn't have enough to worry about as it is. Besides, James is allowed to go off and snog whoever he wants. Even Regulus Black. Remus cringes without meaning to. Anyway, what does Remus know about anything? He isn't exactly a relationship expert. What makes him think he has a right to decide what is and isn't good? Other than the fact that he's caught Regulus and his asshole friend several times picking on younger Muggle-born students. Regulus is never actively involved, which is smart of him, really. Means he never gets detention, but he's always there, laughing and jeering with the rest of them. Remus's eyes trail to James, who's walking just slightly ahead of him, discussing Quidditch strategies with Frank. He wonders if James knows that. He wonders if he just doesn't care. He shakes his head, trying to get that thought out, angry with himself for even thinking it in the first place. James isn't like that. But then, he hadn't thought Sirius was like that either, and look how that turned out. And then, as if his thoughts are manifesting themselves, he spots a dark head down the hall. Hey, Pete, it's a stupid split-second decision. I just remembered I forgot to return something to the library. I'll be back in a sec, all right? He starts pulling away. You don't want to wait until after breakfast? Peter asks, sounding slightly scandalized. It won't take long. I'll see you in the Great Hall, yeah? Remus starts walking more purposefully, checking over his shoulder to make sure James isn't watching, but him and Frank have already disappeared around the corner. Oi, Black! Regulus looks up from the conversation he'd been having with two other Slytherins, fourth years by the look of them. Neither of them Rosier or Crouch, though, which will make things easier. A word, Remus says, trying to interject as much prefect authority into his voice as possible. There's a pause, during which Remus thinks Regulus might refuse, and isn't at all sure what his course of action will be then. Slink back into the Great Hall with his tail between his legs? But then Regulus turns back to his companion, saying something too quiet for Remus to hear, before he pulls away from the wall and walks toward him. Am I in trouble? He asks dryly, hands in his pockets, face impassive. Remus searches his eyes for any hint of what it is that James sees in him, but finds nothing. Regulus has none of Sirius's warmth or ease. Everything about him is tight and controlled and superficial. James trusts too easily. Remus isn't interested in pleasantries, though he does make sure to lower his voice. He watches Regulus's eyes widen and feels his stomach drop. He really had been hoping he was wrong about this. He sees the good in everyone, even when there isn't any. Know that from personal experience, Lupin. The younger boy snaps back, quickly recovering from his shock. Remus hates the way those words tie him up in knots. Yes, he answers without wavering. Remus rarely uses his height to intimidate, but he does so now, hovering over the other boy, making himself big. I want you to know that if you hurt him, I will take you apart, bone by bone. Do you understand? Regulus's gray eyes are unwavering, running over Remus's face. Did he tell you? No. Regulus nods slowly. Does he know you're here then? Threatening me? Not a threat, Remus says with confidence. It's a promise. I know you think you're very tough and scary, and that you've become immune to the dark after living in that haunted mansion you call a home. But I promise you, I am worse than anything you have ever faced, and there is nothing I won't do for him. Another moment of silence passes. It's unnerving, the similarities between Regulus and Sirius. Their faces, their hair, their eyes, all so familiar, and yet, while on Sirius they're untamable, on Regulus everything has been meticulously manicured and controlled, forced into a shape it doesn't want to take. You can't scare me, Lupin, the younger boy says finally, but you also don't need to. Oh? I don't want to hurt him. Remus snorts. You'll have to excuse me if that doesn't mean much coming from you. Regulus only shrugs. Believe what you want. Can I go now? Or are you going to take house points or something? Remus grinds his teeth, contemplating painting several more violent pictures just to really drive his point home. One look in Regulus's bored gray eyes tells him there would be no point. Go on, then, Remus says eventually, waiting another beat before he heads to the Great Hall. Of all the bloody people James could have chosen, and really, he could have had any of them, apart from Lily, he had to choose Regulus. But then again, Remus had to have Sirius, didn't he? What was it people were always saying about glass houses? Idiots, he mutters under his breath. The both of us. Chapter endnotes. Hello, beautiful people. Oh, hey, it's Wolfstar featuring Lily Evans. I just really needed some more serious Remus interaction, so hopefully you guys felt the same. Your comments are pancakes and hot chocolate with really big marshmallows. Fun fact, I have never once spelt marshmallows right on the first try.